not longer than 4 minutes.
Oh, you were just here.
Why is that? Can you make that not look like that? You see all the tabs?
Oh, it's because I have my...
It's always like that.
It wasn't like that, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You have to hit a button. It won't just do it like ordinary doing.
It will.
It won't. Genuinely, mate, it won't.
There's a full screen button somewhere on your laptop. I don't know which one it is though. I don't want to press it on it.
Press that. Go back. Just like double click it.
What,
The top tab. Up. Up.
Yeah,
Yeah, double click it.
there is a full screen button, but I don't know which one it is on.
Yeah, let's have a look at
on
shortcuts on that.
Those
Yeah,
3
somewhere.
keys and then press them back to us. 15.
The quick key, isn't it? They call it.
15.
Full screen shortcut. Whatever on that.
Oh, so no, he's rude.
It was
He's
in you, I left
He
it
walked
right
in
in.
and he just said to Grace, he said, so should I take your name? And he said, you should know this by now. This is that?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, she's gone.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, he's gone.
No,
This is gone. She never supposed to.
And always feels
With the gold,
we've missed something.
if I see you go,
We're stupid.
no,
That's it. That's it.
It's always been like that.
Has it?
That was quite good one.
Have you done it?
When you going to start?
No, I don't know how to do it. It's always been like that.
That's not out of the world, is it? Just in here.
the last one was here, I bought
We're live on YouTube, by the way, everyone.
Okay.
We're live.
so I'm happy with that.
Oh, yeah, no, I've got the last set.
I didn't even open it.
I don't really know how to do full screen on this.
Can you open this for me? Can you open the screen?
Yes, just
Please.
normal.
Is it? So, which screen is it?
So he's live, so.
Okay.
Alright. So it's as we asked, yeah,
Yeah.
right, left.
Easy website.
Okay.
If we see anything, we can put the
Yeah, if you miss anything,
Yeah, just.
just shout, alright?
Yeah.
Where do I put my
Sit.
number of light up? Oh, 10 o'clock.
Just refresh it.
And silver's go down.
Just started. Try not, yeah, I was difficult. Because every time I start shitting, it goes, yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be careful.
Right, you're broadcasting now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah.
A very good morning to you all. We're just a minute late. We were just getting everything set up. But welcome to RWB Auctions. Hope you have a good day. If you could bid quickly, that would be much appreciated, so we can get through these at a sensible pace. Our next specialist auction for jewellery, watches, gold coins will be on the 22nd of April, and we're taking consignments already for that auction. Some very nice things. So let's start straight off with lot 1. And we'll start at 260, 280, 300 I'm looking for, 300 I'm looking for. At 280, 300 I'm looking for. At 300, in the room, at 300. 320 is the next bit. At 300, in the room. At 300, at 300, at 320 now. At 320, against you, sir. You're coming back. At 320, 340, 340 now. At 340 in the room. 360 I'm looking for. At 340, at 340 I'm selling it away. At 340, at 342, thank you very much. Is it all that number today?
Just one.
Just leave it at that then. You keep bidding. Right, let's start lot 2. And we can start straight in at £160. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. Good morning. At 170 now with the sale room. At 170, 180 I'm looking for. At 170. At 170. At £170 you're all out. At 170 to the sale room. 11390. Lot 3. There we go, lot 3, 3-stone opal. Lot 3, I'm stuck on the screen on 2.
Sorry, I still type.
And I can start straight in at £240 with Easy Live. At 240, 260 I'm looking for. At 240, at 240, at 240, at £240. No, we're not at 260 in the room. At 260, 280 now with Easy Live. Coming back, sir. At 280, 300 is the next bid. No, at 280, at £280 with Easy Live Auctions. At 280, 2662. Lot 4. And I can start straight in with the sale room at £160. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. At 160, 170 in the room. At £170 in the room. At 180 now with the sale room against you, sir. At 180, 190, at 180, at 180, at £180 you're all out. At 180 to the sale room. 11390. Lot 5, and the internet has come in at 95, 100 with Easy Live Auctions. At 100, 110 I'm looking for. At 110 with the sale room. At 120 in the 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 room. At 120. 130 I'm looking for. At 120. At 120. At £120 I'm selling. At 120, 2212, lot 6, and we can start straight in. At 320, 340 I'm looking for. At 320, 340, 340, 360, 380 with me, 400 I'm looking for. At 380, 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 last time of asking, not quite there, not quite there, not sold. Lot 7, and we start straight in at 320 with Easy Live Auctions. At 320, 340 now. At 340, 360 I'm looking for. At 360, 380, 380, 380, 400, 400. At 400, 420 now. At 420. At 420, 440 I'm looking for. At 420, at 420 I'm selling it away. At 420 to Easy Live Auctions to 662. Lot 8, and we have several bids that are close together, and I have to start with me on commission at £330. At 330, 340 I'm out now. At 340 with Easy Live Auctions. At 340, 360 I'm looking for. At 340, at 340, at £340 I'm selling. At 340 to 593. Lot 9. Lots of interest with me, and I have to start straight in at £215, at 215, at 215 with commission at 215, 220 now I'm out with the sale room at 220, at 220, 240 I'm looking for, at 220, at 220 with the sale room, at £220, at £220 I'm selling it away, at 220, to 157, 1062. Thank you. Lot 10 is this unusual swivel ring. There we go. And start with me at 1,000, 1,100, 1,100, 1,200 I'm looking for. At 1,100, 1,200 I'm looking for. At 1,100, at 1,100, at 1,100. And it's staying with me. Not sold that one. Lot 11. Lot 11 is the daisy ring there. We start with me at 700, 720 I'm looking for. At 700, 720 I'm looking for. At 700, 720 I'm looking for. At 700, at 700, at 700, at 700. Not quite there. Lot 12, and we start straight in at 2,200, at 2,800 now, at 3,000, at 3,000 with Easy Live Auctions at 3,000, 3,2 I'm looking for, at 3,000, 3,2 now, at 3,200, 3,4 I'm looking for. At 3,200, 3,4 I'm looking for. I pause just for a second at £3,200 and I'm selling it away at 3,200. Thank you very much. 587. Lot 13. Lot 13. And I start with me at 3,000, at 3,000, 3,2 I'm looking for, at 3,000, 3,2 I'm looking for, at 3,000, 3,2 I'm looking for, at 3,000, at 3,000, at £3,000, not sold that one. Lot 14, and we have to start with me, I'm afraid, on commission at 800. It's 800 with me on commission. 850 is the next bid. At 800 with me on commission. At 800. At 800. 850 I'm looking for. At £800. At £800 I'm selling it away. At 800 to 1604. Lot 15. We've got a telephone on this. Thank you. And start with me at 240, 240 with me, 260 I'm looking for, 260 I'm looking for, 260, thank you, at 260, 280 is the next bid, at 260, 280 I'm looking for, at 280 now, at 280, 300, at 300 on the telephone, at 300, 320 I'm looking for, 320 I'm looking for, at 300, all on the telephone, at £300, at 300, selling it away, at 300.
C10181.
Thank you very much. Lot 16 now. Lot 16, and we can start straight in at 260, 280 I'm looking for, at 280, 300 now. Straight in at 300, 340. At 340, 360 I'm looking for. At 340, 360 I'm looking for. At 340 with Easy Live Auctions. At £340, you're all out. At 340 to 652. Lot 17. And I can start straight in at 170, 180 I'm looking for. At 170, 180 is the next bid. At 170, at 170, at £170 I'm selling to Easy Live Auctions. At 170 to 602, thank you, lot 18. And we can start straight in at 200. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. At 220 with the sale room. At 220, 240 now with Easy Live Auctions at 240. 240, 260 I'm looking for. At 240. At 240 I'm selling it away. At £240. At 240, 2518. Lot 19. Lot 19. And I start at 280, 300 I'm looking for. At 280, 300 I'm looking for. At 280, 300 I'm looking for. At 280. At 300 now, with the sale room. At 300, 320 I'm looking for. At 300, 320 I'm looking for. At £300, at £300 I'm selling it away. At 300 to 60611. Lot 20. Lot 20. Lot 20, and I can start straight in with Easy Live Auctions at 170. I have 180, 190, 200 I'm looking for. At 190, 200 I'm looking for. 200 in the room. Commissions are out now. At 200 in the room. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. At 200. At 200. At 220 now. At 220. Coming back. 240. No, at 220. At £220, at £220, I'm selling it away. At 220, 2615 with Easy Live Auctions. And lot 21 now, and we start straight in at £360. At 360, 380 I'm looking for. At 360, 380 I'm looking for. At 360. At 380 now with Easy Live Auctions at 380. 400 I'm looking for. At 380, 400. At 380, 400. At £380. At 380 to Easy Live Auctions 673. Lot 22. And we start straight in at £500. At 500, 550 I'm looking for. At 500, 550 I'm looking for. At 550 now, in the room at 550, ahead of Easy Live. In the room at 550, 600 now. 650, no, at 600. At 600, at 600, at £600 and selling at 600 to 673. Lot 23, and I can start straight in with the sale room at 260. At 260, 280 I'm looking for. At 260, 280. 280, was that a bid, sir, at 280? 280, 300 now. At 300. At 300. Easy Live Auctions at 300, 320 I'm looking for. At £300 I'm selling away. At 300 to 673. Lot 24. And I start straight in at £600. At 600, 650 I'm looking for. At 600, 650 I'm looking for. At 600, at 600, at £600 I'm selling at 600 to 597. Lot 25, I have 3 commission bids, and I have to start with me, even though the internet is showing on commission at 320. At 320 with me, 340 I'm looking for. At 320, 340, 340 now. With the sale room, commissions are out at 340. At 340, 360 I'm looking for. At 340, at £340, sale room at 340 to 1994021. Lot 26, lots of interest, and the sale room, no, Easy Live Auctions, take the commissions out. I start at 650. At 650 with Easy Live Auctions at 650, 700 I'm looking for. At 650, at 650, at £650. At 650 to 578. Lot 27, and I start with me at 235. 235, 240 I'm looking for, 240, I thought so, 240 in the room, ahead of the Easy Life, in the room at 240, 260 I'm looking for, at 240, at 240, at 240 pounds, 240 to 118, was that 118? Yep, 118, 188, sorry, thank you. Lot 28. 28, there we go, and start me at 70. Start me at £70, at £70, at £70, £70 I'm looking for. At 50 then, 50 I have now. At £50 I give a 5, at £50 I give a 5. At 55, 60, at 60 and 5. At £60, at £60, 65, 60, at 60, at £60, at £60, selling and away at 60, 212, Lot 29, the J carved ring, and I start with me at 180, 190, 200 I'm looking for. At 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 100, 200 now with Easy Live Auctions, I'm out at 200. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. At 200, at 200, at £200, selling it away. At 200, 2615. Lot 30. And we start straight in. Lovely ring this, and it swivels, and we start straight in at 350 with Easy Live Auctions at 350, 360 I'm looking for, 360 now, in the room at 360, at 360, in the room at 360, 380 I'm looking for, at 360, at 380, 400, at 400 now, in the room at 400, 420 I'm looking for, at 400, 420, 440, 440 now, at 440, 460 now, at 460, 480, at 460, 480, 480, thank you, at 480, 500 I'm looking for, at 500 I'm looking for, at £480 I'm selling, at 480 to 188, Lot 31, and we can start straight in. Easy Live Auctions at £700. At 700, 750 I'm looking for. At 700, 750 I'm looking for. At 700, at 700, at £700 to 679. Lot 32. And I can start straight in at £320, 320, 340 I'm looking for. At 320, 340 in the room. At 340 in the room at 340, 360 I'm looking for. In the room bid at 340. At £340 I'm selling at 340. At 340 to 188. Lot 33. And I start at £110. At 110, 120 I'm looking for. At 110, 120 in the room now. At 120 in the room. At 120, 130 I'm looking for. At 120, 130. At 120, 130. At £120. 120 to 188. Lot 34. Lot 34, and I start straight in at 160, at 160, 170, 180 now, at 180, 190 I'm looking for, 200 now, at 200, 220, 220 now, at 220, 240 I'm looking for, at 220, 240 I'm looking for. Easy Live Auctions at 220, 240 in the room now. In the room bid at 240, 260 I'm looking for at £240, selling and away at 240 to 188, Lot 35, and we start straight in at £500, at 500, 550 I'm looking for, at 500, 550 I'm looking for, at 500, at 500, at £500 I'm selling it away at 550 now, at 550, 600 I'm looking for, at 550 pounds, I'm selling at 550, at 550 to lot buyer 600, lot 36, and I have 3 commission bids and they're all taken out, and I have to start with Easy Live Auctions at £900. At 900, 950 I'm looking for. At 900, 950 I'm looking for. At 900, at 900, at £900, you're all out at 900. 900 to 625. Lot 37, and I start straight in at £160, 170 I'm looking for. At 160, 170 now, 180 Easy Life, 180, 190, 190 now in the room at 190. At 190 in the room at 190, 200 I'm looking for. At 190 in the room at 190. At £190 in the room at 190. 190 to 188. Lot 38. And start me at 300. Start me at 300. 300, 250 then. 250 I have, 260 I'm looking for. At 250, 260 I'm looking for. At 250, 260 now, 260, 280, you're back at 280. In the room at 280, at 280, at 300 now, at 300, 320 in the room. At 320 now, at 320 in the room. I'm selling, you're out, at Easy Live Auctions, you're out at 340, no you're not, at 340, 360, no. At £340 I'm selling to Easy Live Auctions, 340 to 688. Lot 39, lot 39, I've just got a mistake here. Lot 39, and I start straight in at £300, at 300, at 300, 320 I'm looking for, at 300, 320, 320 now, at 320, at 320, in the room at 320, 340 I'm looking for, at 320, at 320, I'm selling and away at 320, in the room at 320 to 188. Lot 40, and we can start straight in at 190. There's a battle going on the internet at 190, 200 I'm looking for, 200 I'm looking for, 190, 200 I'm looking for, 200 I have, at 200 in the room, at 200, 220 I'm looking for, at 200, 220 I'm looking for, at 220, 220, 240 against, 220, 240 now, at 240, at 240, 260 I'm looking for, in the room at 240, in the room at 240, 260 now against, at 260, 280, at 280 now, he's thought about it, at 280, in the room at 280, 280, 300 I'm looking for, at 280, at £280, at 280 to 188, lot 41, and we can start straight in at £700, at 700, at 700, 750 I'm looking for, at 700, at 700, at £700 with Easy Live Auctions, at 700 to 602, lot 42, the Lily, start me at 60, start me at 60. Start me at 60, at 40 now, I'll take at 40 with the sale room, at 40, looking for 2, at £40, looking for 2, at 42 now, at 42, looking for 5, at 42, looking for 5, at 42, at 45 now, at 45, looking for 8, at 45, 48 now, at 48, looking for 50, at 50 now, looking for 5, at £50, looking for 5, at 55 now, at 55, 60 I'm looking for, at 55, 60 I'm looking for, at 55, at 55, I'm selling it away, at £55, 55 to 623. Lot 43. Lot 43. And I can start with me at 130, 140 I'm looking for. At 130, 140 I'm looking for. At 130, 140 I'm looking for. At 130, at 130, and staying with me, not quite there, it's with me. Lot 44, and I can start straight in at £180 with Easy Live Auctions. At 200 now. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. At 220. At 220. With you at the moment. At 220, the screen's frozen. It's at 220 in the room at the moment. It's 220 in the room. At 220 in the room. 240 now with the sale room at 240, at 240, 260 against, at 240, at 240, apologise for the delay, at 242.
Go and wait there a sec.
Was it
242. No number up. The screen's frozen.
SR 541
541
006.
006. And next lot is 45. Can you just apologise to your telephone bidder, please? Good time to have a drink.
What was the, go back to, yeah, it was, this number here.
We'll get this sorted shortly. 54 1006. Right, 45, we're away again. And there's a telephone bid here, and I can start straight in with Easy Live Auctions at 160, 170, I'm looking for. 170 in the room, at 170 in the room. 180, 190, no, at 180, 200 now. At 200, 220. At 200, 220, 220 now on the telephone. At 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220, at 220, you're all out. At 200, no, at 240 now, 260. I'll take 250, treat you all the same. At 250, 260 I'm looking for. At 250, 260 I'm looking for. At 250 with the telephone. At £250, you're all out with the phone. At 250, telephone.
C10181.
Thank you. Lot 46. Lot 46. And I start with the internet at 200. 220 with me at 220. At 220. At 220. 240 I'm looking for. At 220. 240 I'm looking for. At 220, 240, 240 I'm out. At 240, 260 I'm looking for. At 240 with the sale room. At 240. At £240 I'm selling it away. At 240 to 1994021. Lot 47, and I start straight in at £60. At £60 you can buy 5, at £60 you can buy 5. At £60, looking for 5. At £60, 65 just ahead of you. Easy live. 70 if you want. At 65, 70. At £70, in the room at 70, looking for 5. At £70, looking for 5. At £70, 75 now. At 75. At £75, at 75, I'm selling it away. At 75, 2688. Lot 48. And I can start straight in with Easy Live Auctions at 380, at 380, 400 I'm looking for. At 380, 400 I'm looking for. At 380, at 400 now, with the sale room. At 400, with the sale room. At 400, 420, Easy Live Auctions at 440 now. At 440, 460 I'm looking for. At 440, at 440 pounds, and I'm selling it away. At 440, 2673. Lot 49, and I have commissions with me. Oh, my screen's just gone and it's reloading. Just bear with me, sorry, my screen just went blank, and Apple are probably doing an upgrade. So I apologise. Does anybody know a good joke? This machine is. I've got to wait, haven't I? I don't know. I haven't touched anything.
Is it on charge?
If you just bear with us on the internet, we will get there as quickly as possible. It's beyond my control. But bring me sunshine. All the while.
No, just don't say.
It's on charge. Apple is doing an upgrade. I don't know.
Is it loaded?
No, it's Apple is doing an upgrade.
It should just cut you out like that. It's your choice to do it.
Apologies on the internet, the screen went black and an apple appeared. And somebody was hungry because it took a bite.
This covers Bruce's bringing on.
We've just got hold of a replacement computer, so just bear with us, we will be with you soon. And we're on lot 49. We're just trying to get connected. We have to program the computer. Sorry. We can fly people to the moon, but we can't get a computer right.
minute.
I think I just drew all your dreams.
I can tell you that our next sale of the 4th of March, there are some fabulous items in the sale, especially when I keep looking at the motorbikes over there. They are lovely, they are all in the sale, and we've got some amazing furniture. Yeah, that's a cougar. It's a cougar. Yeah, it's a cougar. And her name is Bella.
Bella.
The family called her Bella.
Cat is a cougar, and it's called Bella.
But we do have, as I say, some marvellous furniture.
This won't fit that charger, but there should be plenty of charging for the moment. Right.
Yes, okay.
It's the charger is the
We'll get a charge for that. I'll put in the chat. All right.
The original care, if you buy it from
It should be okay for a little while. Okay.
What's it like?
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Still the same.
Yes, but the bid is 600 with me. Right. We think we're back online. We've replaced the computer, so thank you for your patience. Thank you to the internet. We're on lot 49, and I have a bid with me at £600 on commission. At 600, 650 I'm looking for. At 600, 650 I'm looking for. At 600, 650 I'm looking for. At 600 on commission. At £600. At 600, that's my buyer, which is 1604. Lot 50 now. Lot 50, and I have lots of interest, and I can start straight in at £340 on commission. At 340, 360 I'm looking for. At 340, 360 I'm looking for. At 340, at £340. At 340, my buyer, 1604. Lot 51, and I can start straight in with the sale room at £240. At 240, 260 I'm looking for. At 240, 260 I'm looking for. At 240, at £240 I'm selling. At 240 to the sale room, 879320. Lot 52. Lot 52, and I can start straight in at £360 with Easy Live Auctions. At 360, 380 I'm looking for. At 360, 380 I'm looking for. At 360, at £360. At 360 to 652. Lot 53, and I have to start with me. There are commission bids. And I start with me straight in at £470. 480 I'm looking for. At 470, 480 I'm looking for. At 470, 480 I'm looking for. At 470, at £470, selling it away. At 470 to 451. Lot 54. And I can start straight in with Easy Live Auctions at £900. At 900, 950 I'm looking for. At 900, 950 I'm looking for. At 950 now. At 950, at 950, 1,000 I'm looking for. 1,000 in the room now. At 1,000 in the room. At 1,000, 1,100 I'm looking for. At 1,000, at 1,000, at £1,000 in the room. At 1,188, is that correct? Lot 55. Lot 55, lots of interest with me, and I have to start straight in at £800. At 800, 850 I'm looking for. At 800, 850 I'm looking for. At 800, at 800, at £800. At 800 to 1604. Lot, just bear with me, sorry. Lot 56. And I start straight in at 85, looking for 90, at 85, 90 I'm looking for, 90 now in the room, at £90, looking for 5 at 95, 100, at 95 against 100, at 100 now, in the room, 110, 120, it's at 110, at 110, at 120 now with the sell room, at 120, 130 I'm looking for, at 120, 130 I'm looking for, at 120, at £120, selling it away, at 120 to the sell room, 11390, lot 57, lot 57, and I start at 2,000, 3,000 now, at 3,000, at 3,000, 3,2 I'm looking for, at 3,000, 3,2 I have now, at 3,200, at 3,200, 3,4, 3,6 now, 3,8, 4,000, at 4,000, at 4,000, 4,2 I'm looking for, at 4,000, 4,2, at 4,200, at 4,200, 4,4 I'm looking for, at 4,200, 4,4 I'm looking for, at 4,400 now. Easy Live Auctions at 4,400, 4,6 is the next bid, at 4,400, at 4,400, I just pause, give you time to think, at £4,400, I'm selling, hammers down at 4,400, at 4,400, thank you very much. 668 to the internet. Thank you very much. Lot 58. And I have commissions, and I have to start with me at 220, I'm afraid. On commission at 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220, at 220, at £220 I'm selling away. With me at 2,200 to 1604. Lot 59, lot 59, I'm stuck on 58, there we go, and I have to start with me at 1,200 on commission. It's with me on commission at 1,200. I'll take 1,300, the next bid, at 1,200. 1,300 I'm looking for, at 1,200, at £1,200 I'm selling and away, at 1,200 to 1604, lot 60, and I have to start with me at £660. 660 with me at 660, at 660, 700, I'm out at 700 with Easy Live Auctions at 700, at 700, 750 I'm looking for, at 700, at 700, at £700 I'm selling it away, at 700 to 612, lot 61, lot 61, and I start with me straight in at 900, 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 at £900. My buyer at 900 to 1604, lot 62. And I start straight in at 1,500 with Easy Live Auctions, looking for 16, at 1,500, at 1,500, at £1,500, I'm selling and away, at 1,500 to 597, Lot 63, and I can start straight in at £60 with the sell room at £60, looking for 5, at £60, looking for 5, at £60, at £60, at £60, selling and away. At 60 to 7, no, 173448. Lot 64, and lots of interest, and I have to start with Easy Live Auctions at £360. At 360, 380 I'm looking for. At 360, 380 I'm looking for. At 360. At £360 I'm selling and away. At 360 to 662. Lot 65, this superset, and I start with me at 2,100, 22 I'm looking for. At 2001, 22 I'm looking for. At 2001, 22 I'm looking for. At 2,100, at 2,100, at 2,100. Unfortunately, that's staying with me. Not sold. Lot 66, and lots of interest, and I start with Easy Live Auctions at £800. At 800, 850 I'm looking for. At 800, 850 I'm looking for. At £800. At 800, at 800, at 800, 800 at 612. Lot 67, and I start straight in at 160 with Easy Live Auctions at 160, 170 I'm looking for. At 100, 170 now in the room at 170. Room bid 180, 180, 190, 190 now. At 190 in the room at 190. At 190, 200 I'm looking for. At 190, 200 I'm looking for. At 190, at 190, at £190. We roll out at 190, 190 to 212. Lot 68. And I start straight in at £110. At 110, 120 I'm looking for. At 110, 120 I'm looking for. At 110, at £110, selling it away. Easy Live Auctions at 110, 2597. Lot 69, and I have to start straight in at £850. At 850, 900 I'm looking for. At 850. At £850 I'm selling at 850. 850 to Easy Live Auctions 2560. Lot 70. Lot 70, several bids, all the same. I have to start with me on commission, I'm afraid. At 480 on commission. At 480, 500 I'm looking for. At 480 on commission. At 480, 500 I'm looking for. At 480. At £480 I'm selling at 480. At 480, my buyer 1604. Lot 71. And I start straight in at 140, 150 I'm looking for. At 140, 150 I'm looking for. At 140, 150. At 140, 150. At £140 I'm selling it away. At 140, 2518. Lot 72. And I start straight in at £220. At 220, 260 now. At 260, 280 I'm looking for. 280 with the sell room. At 280, 300 I'm looking for. At 280, 300. At 280, 300. At £280 I'm selling at 280. 300 now. 320 I'm not selling. At 320 it's still live. At 320, 340 I'm looking for. At 320. At £320. At 320 to 31900 to the sale room. Lot 73. Lot 73. Lot 73. And I start with me at 200, 220 I'm looking for. 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 At 220 I'm out. At 220, 240 I'm looking for. Easy Live Auctions. At 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220. At £220 I'm selling. At 220. At 220, 2673. Lot 74. And I have a lot of interest on commission, but I'm with Easy Live Auctions at £1,000. At 1,000, 1,100 I'm looking for. At 1,000, 1,100 I'm looking for. At 1,000, at 1,000, at £1,000 I'm selling and way. At 1,000, 2578. Lot 75. Lot 75 with the pearls. And I start at £80, 90 I'm looking for. At £80, 90 I'm looking for. At £80, 90 I'm looking for. At £80, at £80, 90 I'm looking for. At 80, no interest at 80, not sold. Lot 76, and I start straight in at £90. Look at 5 at £90. Look at 5 at 95 now. 95, 100. In the room at 100, in the room at 100, 110 I'm looking for, 110, 120, 120 now, at 120, 130 I'm looking for, at 120, 130 I'm looking for, in the room, at 130 now, 130, 140, no, at 130, selling to 130, Easy Live Auctions, 2612, Lot 77, 2 commission bids, and I have to start with me, I'm afraid, on commission at 260, 280 I'm looking for. It's with me at 260, 280 I'm looking for. At 260, 280 I'm looking for. At 260 I'm selling it away. At 260 to 1604. Lot 78, and I start with me at 140 on commission. At 140, 150 I'm looking for. At 150 I'm out. At 150, 160 now, back of the room, head of Easy Live, in the room at 160, 170, 180, 180 now. At 180, in the room at 180, 190 I'm looking for. At 180, 190. At 180, 190, 190, 200, so at 200 now. At 200, 220, I'm looking for 220, 240. No, at 220. At 220, I'm selling it away. You sure say you're out. At £220. Easy Live Auctions at 220, 2673. Lot 79. And I start with me, straight in, Easy Live Auctions at 380, at 380, 400 I'm looking for, at 380, 400 I'm looking for, at 420 now, at 420, 440 I'm looking for, at 460 now, 2 bidders, at 460, 480 I'm looking for, at 480 now, at 480, 500 I'm looking for, at 480, 500 now, at 500, at 500, at 500, I'll take 20 if you like. No, I won't. At 550 with Easy Live Auctions at 550, 600 I'm looking for. All the same now at 550, 600. At 550, 600. At £550 I'm selling it away. At 550, good battle. At 612, lot 80. Lot 80, and I have to start with me on commission at 160. It's with me on commission at 160. At 160, 170, 180, I'm out at 180, 190, 190 at the back. Easy Live, 200, 200, 220, it's 220 now. At 220 in the room. At 220, at 220. Who's 220 now, 220 in the room, at 220, 240, 240, 260, 260 now, at 260 in the room, at 260, 280, 280, 300, at 280, at 280, at £280 and selling, 280, 2673, lot 81, and I start with me, Easy Live Auctions at 240. At 240, 260 I'm looking for. At 240, 280 now. 320 now. At 320, 340, 360. At 360. At 360, 400 now. At 400, 420 I'm looking for. At 400, 420 I'm looking for. At 400, at 400, at 400 pounds I'm selling it away. At 440 now, no I'm not. At 440, 460 I'm looking for. At 440, 460 now, I'm looking for 460. At 440 pounds, 440, what a battle. 5, 6, 7, thank you very much. Lot 82. And start me, unusual jade pendant this, start me at 60. Start me at 60. At 60 pounds, at 60 pounds. The centre moves, by the way. At 60 pounds, at 60, at 40 pounds then. At 40 pounds, at 40 pounds. At 40 pounds I'm looking for. At 40 pounds, 30 then, no less. At 30 pounds I'm looking for. At 30 pounds, at 30 pounds, 30 I have, looking for 2. At 30 pounds, looking for 2. At 32 now. At 32, looking for 5. At 35, looking for 8. At 38, 40 now I'm looking for. At 38, 40. At 38, 40. At 38, at 38, I'm selling it away. At 38 pounds, 38 to 612. Lot 83. And I have to start with me at 75, 80 I'm looking for. At 75, 80 I'm looking for. At 75, 80 now. At 80 pounds with the sell room. At 80 pounds, looking for 5 at 85 now. At 85, at 85. 90 I'm looking for. At 85, 90 now. At 90 pounds, looking for 5. At 90 pounds, looking for 5 at 95. At 95, at 95. Looking for 100 at 100 now. 110 I'm looking for. At 110. At 110, 120 is the next bid. At 110, 120 I'm looking for. They're thinking on the sell room. At 110. At 120 now. At 120, 130 I'm looking for. We're at 130 now. At 130, 140, don't let it get away. At 130. At 130 pounds, you're out on the sell room. It's with Easy Live Auctions at 130. At 130 to 673. Lot 84, and I can start straight in. Very unusual this, and I can start straight in. At 85 with the sell room. At 90 now. At 90 pounds, 95 now. At 100, 140, 160. At 180 now, 200. At 200, 220, 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220. At 220 pounds, at 220. So Easy Live Auctions 591, lot 85. I have lots of commission bids, and I have to start with me on commission, I'm afraid, at 900. It's with me at 900. At 900, 950 I'm looking for, on commission, on the books at 900, 950 I'm looking for. At 900, at 900, at 900 pounds I'm selling it away. On commission at 900 to 1604. Lot 86, and I have to start with me at 260 pounds on commission. At 260 with me, at 260, 280 I'm looking for. At 260, 280 I'm looking for. At 260, at 260 pounds I'm selling it away. At 260 to 1604. Lot 87, 1, 2, 3, 4 commission bids, and I have to start with me straight in at 880 pounds. At 880, 900 I'm looking for. At 80, 900 I'm looking for. At 880 pounds I'm selling it away at 880. 880 on commission to 1673. Lot 88, and I have to start with me at 1,600. At 1,600 with me. At 1,600. At 1,600. At 1,600. At 1,600 pounds, I'm selling it away at 1,600. At 1,600 to 1673. Lot 89. And I can start straight in at £200. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. At 200, at 200, at £200. No, I'm not. It's 220 with me. On commission, at 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220 on commission, at 220, at 220, at £220 on commission, at 220, 21604, lot 90, and I can start straight in. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. 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 At 200, at 200, at £200 I'm selling at £200. At 200 to 518. Lot 91. This super bracelet, absolutely stunning. And a start with me at 1819, 2000 I'm looking for. 2000 I'm looking for. At 19, 2000 I'm looking for. At 2000 I have. Commissions are out at 2000. At 2000. At 2000, 22 I'm looking for, 22 I'm looking for, or 21 if you like. 2001 I'm looking for. At 2000, at 2000, 21 I'm looking for. At £2,000, at 2000, you're all out. I'm selling at 2000. At £2,000, 2681, Easy Live Auctions, lot 92, 1, 2, 3 commission bids, and I have to start straight in at £440 with me, at 440 with me, 460 I'm looking for, at 440 on commission, at £440 I'm selling it away, at 440 to 1604, lot 93, and I have to start straight in at £280 with Easy Live Auctions at 280, at 280, 300 I'm looking for, lovely thing this, 300 I'm looking for, at 280, 300 I'm looking for, at £280 I'm selling at 280, 300 now. They've woken up. It really is a lovely bracelet at 300. And they're nodding their heads. You should be bidding, madam. At 300. In the old days, I'd have taken it as a bid with a nod. At 300. 320 I'm looking for. At 300. At 300. You're all missing a chance here at £300. Easy Live Auctions, 2673. Lot 94, 1, 2, 3 commission bids. And I have to start straight in with Easy Live Auctions at £950. At 950 I'm out. 1,000 I'm looking for. At 950, 1,000 I'm looking for. At 950. At £950 I'm selling it away at 950. At 950 to 639. Lot 95. And I have to start straight in with me at £200 on commission, at 200, 220 I'm looking for, at 200, 220 I'm looking for, at 200, at 200, at 200, at £200, 220, 240 with me, on commission at 240, at 260, commissions are out, at 260, 280 I'm looking for, at 260, at £260 I'm selling it away, at 260 to 11390, lot 96, and I have to start with me at 240, 260, 280 I'm looking for, at 260 with me, 280 I'm looking for, at 260, 280 I'm looking for, 280 commissions around, at 280, 300 I'm looking for, at 280, 300, at 280, 300, at £280 I'm selling and away, at 280, 2673, lot 97, and I start with me. It's at 160, 170, 180 I'm looking for. At 180 I have, 190 I'm looking for, 200 now. With the sale room, at 200, 220, at 220, 240 I'm looking for, 240 now. At 240, 260 I'm looking for, at 240, at 240, at £240 I'm selling it away at, no I'm not, at 260 with Easy Live Auctions at 260, 280 now, 280 with the sale room, at 280, 300 I'm looking for, at 280, 300, at 280, 300, at £280 I'm selling it away. 280 to the cell room, 7828, 17. Lot 98, Tiffany & Co. There we go. Lot 98, and I start straight in at 140. At 140, 150 I'm looking for. At 140, 150. At 140, 150. 160 now. At 160, 170. At 160, 170, at 160, at 160, 180, 200 now, at 200, good battle, at 200, 220 I'm looking for, at 200, 220 I'm looking for, at 200 pounds, at 200, 2654, lot 99, 1, 2, 3 commission bids, and I have to start straight in. At £860, at 860, at 860, at 860, at 860, at 860, I'll go 880, 860, 880 I'm looking for, at £860 I'm selling at 860, at 860 to my buyer 1604. Lot 100, and I have several commission bids, and I have to start with me at 2,650. At 2,650, 27 I will take. 2,650 I have, 27 I will take. At 2,650, 2,700 now. At 2,700, I'm treating you all the same. 2,800 I'm looking for. At 2,700, 2,800 I'm looking for. At £2,700, at 2612, lot 101. There's a telephone on this. Thank you very much. And Easy Live Auctions have come in at 2,000. I have a bid of 2,085. I'll take 2-1. 2-1 I'm looking for. 2-1, thank you. At 2,100. At 2,100. 2-2 I'm looking for. At 2,100. 2-2 I'm looking for. At £2,100, you're all out, you've all had your chance at 2,100, to the phone at 2,100.
C6871.
6871. Thank you. Lot 102, and I have to start straight in at £550. At 550, 600 I'm looking for. At 550, 600 I'm looking for. At 550, at £550. At 550 to 673. Lot 103.
It wasn't 673.
Sorry?
It wasn't.
Oh,
That was a late bid that came in. It was 583.
583. At 550?
Yeah.
Yeah, at 550, sorry.
Yeah.
Right, buyer 583, 550, lot 103, and I can start straight in at 3,600, at 3,600 with me, at 3,600, at 3,800, I have 3,900, at 3,900 with me, at 3,900 with me, at 3,900, 4,000 I'm looking for, at 3,900, at 3,900 pounds. I'm selling and away at 3,900. At 3,900 to my buyer, which is 451. Lot 104, and I have to start with me at £45, at 45, 48 I'm looking for. At 45, 48 I'm looking for. At 48 and 50 with me. At £50 looking for 5. At £50 looking for 5. At 55, 60 with me. At £60 looking for 5. At 65, 70 with me. At £70 looking for 5. At £70 looking for 5. At £70. At 75 and 80 with me. At £80 at £80 looking for 5. At £80 at £80 looking for 5. At 85, 90 with me. At £90 at £90. At £90 with me. At £90 at £90 looking for 5. At £90. At £90. At 90. You're all out at 90. £90 to 7155. Lot 105. Lot 105, and I can start with me at 260 on commission. It's with me on commission on the books at 260, 280 I'm looking for. At 260, 280 I'm looking for. At 260, 280 I'm looking for. At 260. At £260 I'm selling it away. At 260 to 1604. Lot 106. Lot 106, and I can start straight in with Easy Live Auctions at 200. At 200, 220 I'm looking for at 220 now. At 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220. At 240 now. At 240, 260. At 260, 280 I'm looking for. At 260, 280 now. At 280, 300, 320. At 340, 340, 360 I'm looking for. At 340, 360 I'm looking for. At 340, at 360 now. At 360, 380. At 380 now. At 380, 400. At 380, 400 I'm looking for. At £380. At 380. At 380. 2621. Lot 107. And I start straight in at £300. At 300, 320 I'm looking for. At 300, 320 I'm looking for. At 300. At 300. At 300. At £300, selling it away at 300. Easy Live Auctions, 602. Lot 108, and I have to start straight in at £250. At 250, 280 now. At 280. At 280, 300. At 300. At 300, 320 I'm looking for. At 300. At £300, I'm selling and away at 300. At 300 to 673. Lot 109, and I start straight in at 130. At 130, 150 now. At 150, 160. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. At 160. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. At £160, selling it away. 160 to 591, Easy Live Auctions. Lot 110. Lot 110. And I have to start straight in at £900. At 900, 950 I'm looking for. At 900, 950 I'm looking for. At 900, 950 I'm looking for. At 900, at 900, at £900. At 900 to 612. Lot 111, and I have to start with me straight in at 65. At 65, 70 I'm looking for. At 65, 70 I'm looking for. At 65, at 65. At £65, I'm selling it away at 65. At 65, my buyer at 480. Lot 112. Lot 112, and I can start straight in with me at £100, at 100, at 110, 120 now, at 120, 130 I'm looking for. At 120, 130 I'm looking for. At 130, 140 with me on commission. At 140 now. At 140, 150 I'm looking for. At 140, 150 I'm looking for. At 150 now. At 150, 160 with me on commission. At 160. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. At 160, 170. At 180 with me on commission. At 180, 190, 190, 200 with me. At 200 on commission. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. At 220 I'm looking for. At 220 I'm looking for. At 200. At £200 I'm selling it away. At 200 to 480. Just having a changeover, quick drink, nearly coming to the end of my stint. Will take over. $113, and I start straight in at £260. Lovely pair of earrings these. 260 I have. 280 I'm looking for. At 260. At 300 now. Don't let them go at 300. 320 I'm looking for. At 300, 320 I'm looking for. Well worth it. At 300, 320 I'm looking for. At 320 now. At 320, 340 is the next bid. At 320, 340 I'm looking for. Don't lose them. At 320, 340 I'm looking for. At 320. At 320. Last time at 320. You've had your chance. At 320, 2673 on Easy Live Auctions. Lot 14. And I have to start. Lot 114, I have to start straight in at £160. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. At 160, 170 I'm looking for. At 170 now with the sale room. At 170, 180 I'm looking for. At 170, 180. At 170, 180. At 170. At £170 and selling. At 170 to the sale room, 782817. Lot 115, J teardrop earrings, there we go. And I start with me at 85, 95, 100 I'm looking for. 95, 100 I'm looking for. 100 I'm looking for. At 95, 100 I'm looking for. At 95, at 95. I'm not quite there. Staying with me. Lot 116, and I have to start straight in at £700. At 700, 750 I'm looking for. There's a lot of gold there, a lot of items, lovely pair of cufflinks with black opals. At 700, 750 I'm looking for. At 700, at 700, at £700 and selling it away. At 700 to 597, Easy Live Auctions, 117, 2 commission bids with me, and I have to start straight in with me at 145. At 145, 150 I'm looking for. 150 I'm looking for. At 145 on commission, 150 I'm looking for. At 145 and selling, at 145 to 1604. Lot 118, and I start with me at 70, looking for 5. At £70, 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 £70, at £70, not quite there. Stay with me. Lot 119. These citrines, lovely set this. Start at 200, 220 I'm looking for. 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 At 200, at 200, at 200. No interest there, not sold. Lot 120. Lot 120. And I can start with me at £420. At 420 with me, 440 I'm looking for. At 420, 440 I'm looking for. At 420. At 420. At £420 I'm selling at 420. My buyer 1604. Lot 121. Lot 121, and I start straight in at £200 with the sale room. At 200, 220 I'm looking for. At 220 now. With the sale room at 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 220, 240 I'm looking for. At 240 now. At 240, 260 is the next bid. At 240, 260 I'm looking for. It's with Easy Live Auctions at 240, 260 I'm looking for at £240. 240, 2673, lot 122, and I have to start straight in at £650 with the sale room. At 650, at 650, 700 I'm looking for. At 650, at 650, 700 I'm looking for at £650. At 650 to the sale room, 1373038. Lot 123, lot 123, and I start straight in with Easy Live Auctions at 480, 500 is the next bid. At 480, 500. At 480, 500. At 480. At £480 I'm selling it away. At 480 to 597, Easy Live Auctions at 124. This magnificent amethyst set, absolutely stunning. And start me at 2,100. Start me at 2001. Start me at 2001. Start me at 2001. Start me at 2001. 2001 I'm looking for. No interest at 21. No interest at 21. Save that for another day, but please do phone and we can see what we can do for you. Lot 125, and I can start straight in with Easy Live Auctions at £850. At 850. At 850, 900 I'm looking for. At 850, at £850 and away. At 850 to 602. And 2 commission bids on the next one. And they're both taken out. I have to start straight in at 300 with Easy Live Auctions at 300. 320 I'm looking for. At £300. At 300. At 320 now. At 320, 340 I'm looking for. At 320, 340 I'm looking for. At 340 now. At 340 with Easy Live Auctions at 340, 360 now. At 360 with the sale room. At 360, 380 I'm looking for. At 360, 380 I'm looking for. At 360 I'm selling it away. At 360 to 11390. Lot 127, and I start straight in at 1,600. At 1,600, 1,700 I'm looking for. At 1,600 with Easy Live Auctions. At 1,600. At £1,600 and selling at 1,600 to 612. Lot 128, and I start with me on commission. Commission bid of 500. 550 is the next bid. 550 is the next bid. At 500 on commission. At 500. At 500. At £500. At 500. At 500 on commission to 1604. Lot 128. Lot 128, and I can start with me at 1,080. 1100 I'm looking for. At 1080 with me. 1100 I'm looking for. At 1080. At 1080 pounds. At 1080 I'm selling it away. 1080 my buyer to 451. My last lot, then will take over, lot 130. And I have commission bids, and I have to start with me at £660. At 660, I'll take 680 or 700 then. I'll take the 700. At £700, 750 I'm looking for. At 700, 750 I'm looking for. At 700, at 700, at £700 and selling it away. At 700 to 602, and will now take over.
Oh, that looks a bit different, doesn't it? Good morning, everyone. Right, so lot 131, start me off at £120. We have £120 anywhere, looking for 120. Do we see £120 anywhere? Looking for 120 in the room, we're online at 120. Do we see 120? £100 then, do we see £100 anywhere? £100 with you in the front row at £100 then, at 100. Any advance on 100? At £100 in the front row, in the room at 100. Are we all done then? Selling it away to you in the front row at £100. Yours, buyer 212, thank you. Okay, lot number 132. Start me off at, we've got interest on commission, been wiped out by the bid on these live of 850. At 850, looking for 900. Do we see £900 anywhere? At 850, at 850, at 850, at £850. Are we all done then at 850? Any interest on the sale room? Any further interest online or in the room? Are we all done then at £850? Sold to our easy live bidder by 612. 850. Lot number 133, interest on commission and online, with my commission bid at £570, at 570, at £570, at 570, at 570, at £570 then, at 570, at 570. Any advance at £570, and we're all done then selling away to our commission bid at 570. That is by CT1604, 570. Lot number 134, start me off bidding straight in at £150 on Easy Live, but bid taken on the sale room at £200 and at 200, at 220 now, at 220, at £220 on the sale room at 220, at £220 then, at 220 on the sale room at 240 now on Easy Live Auctions, at 240 looking for 260. Do we see 260 anywhere? At 260 now on the sale room. Back on in on the sale room at 260. Easy Live, are you coming back in at 280? Yes, you are. At £280 then. At 280. At 280. At £300 now. Back on the sale room at 300. At 300. At £300. 320 on Easy Live Auctions then. At 320. At 340 now on the sale room. At 340. At 340. At 360 now on Easy Live Auctions. Back in at 360. At £360 and we're all done. At £360. On Easy Live Auctions now at 380 on the sale room. At 380, sale room bidding at £400 now on Easy Live Auctions. Back in at 400, at 420 now, at 420. At £420 on the sale room, at 440 on Easy Live Auctions then. At £440. At 440, 460 now on the sale room, at 460. At 460, at 480 now. At £480. At 480, £500 now. 550 is the next bid. Do we see any advance at £550 now? On the sale, on Easy Live Auctions at 550. At 550, £600 now on the sale room at £600, at 600, at 600, at £600. Any advance at £600 on the sale room at £600. Have we run out of steam at 600? Fair warning then, selling away to our sale room bidder at £600. It's sold £600. Good battle there. 600 to buyer SR11390. Thank you very much. Lot number 135, starting me off, bidding straight in at £150 on Easy Live Auctions at 150, at 150, at 150, at £150 then, at 150, any advance at 150, 170 now, at 170, at 190, at 190, do we see 200 in the room or online at 200, at £200 now, on Easy Live Auctions at 200, at 220 now, at £220 then, at 220, at 220, at £220, are we all done then, selling away at £220 to Easy Live Auctions, bid up? Sold 220 to buyer 658. Lot number 136. We've got interest on commission taking us to a bid of £560 at 560. At 560 on commission with me at 560. At 560. At £560 then. Are we all done at 560? Any further bidding at £560? Fair warning at 560. Sold £560 to buyer CT. 1604. Thank you very much. Lot number 137. Starting off at £100. Do we see £100 anywhere? Do we see 100? Do we see 100? Good collection of jewellery here for £100. Won't go any lower. At £100, it's worth that and more. It's a gift at 100. At 100. At 100. Do we see £100 anywhere? Fair warning then. At £100, this will stay with us. Save for next time. Lot number 138, start me off at £100, bidding straight in at £100 online, at 100, at £100 and online at 100, at £100, any advance at 100. Do we see 110 anywhere? Looking for 110, bidding in on Easy Live Auctions at £100 then, we're all done. At 100, 110 with you sir, in the room at 110. In the room at 110, room bidding at £110 then. At 110, any advance? At £110, we're all done at 110. 110. Sorry, to buy, sorry, 249, thank you. Look. Right, lot number 139. Start me off at £150. Do we see 150? We have 150 on the serum now at 150, at 150, at £150 here, at 150, at 150, at 160 now, at 160, at 170, at 170. Do we see £180 anywhere? Looking for 180 on the serum at £170 then, at 170, at £170, at 170, at 170. Any advance in at £170, selling it away at 170. So 170 to buyer SR. 166. Oh, sorry, I need to see that again.
Sorry. SR 166 526.
526. Thank you very much. Lot number 140. Start me off bidding straight in at £180 with me on commission at 180. With me on commission at 180. 190, 195 with me on commission at £195. With me at 195. With me at 100, 200 commissions out at £200 then. At 200 commissions are out at £200. Any advance at 200? Are we all done then? Wrapping up and selling away at £200. Sold £200 to buyer SR 1576260. Thank you. First sheet done. Lot number 141. Interest on commission and online. Starting us off at 110, 120 with me at 140, 150, 150, 150 at £150 then, at 150 on the internet, at 150 on the serum at £150, at 150, at 150, at £150 and 160 on Easy Live Auctions, at 160, at 160, 170 now back on the serum at 170, at 170, at 170, at £170, and we're all done wrapping up and selling away at £170 then. Fair warning. 170 to buyer S. R1486425. Lot number 142. Interest on commission. Starting us off at £85 with me on commission at 85. At £85 with me. At 95, 100 with me. At 110 with me now. At £110 with me. At 120, 130, 140 with me. 150 with me. That's my bid at 150 on commission at £150 then. At 160. Commission's out on the serum at 160. At 160, 190 on Easy Live Auctions out. At £190, running away at £200 now. At 200, at 200, at £200 on Easy Live Auctions. At £200 then. At £200. At 200, are we all done? At £200, fair warning at 200. £200 to our Easy Live bidder 658. Thank you very much. Lot number 143. We have interest on my books taking us to a bid of £42 with me on commission at 42, at £42 with me, at 45, 48 with me now, at 48, 50 with me, at 55 with me then, at 55, at 55, at 55, 60, commissions out at 60, at 60, at 60, at 65 then, at 70 on Easy Live Auctions, at 70, at 75 now, at 75, at 80, at 85 now, at 85 pounds then, at 85, 90 now, 90 to bid, at 90 pounds, 95 now, at 95 pounds then, at 95, we're all done then, at 95 pounds, fair warning, 95 pounds, sold 95 pounds to buyer 679. Lot number 144, bidding in at 110 pounds, wiping our commission bid out at 110 on the serum, at 110 pounds on the serum, at 110, at 110, at 110 pounds. Any advance at 110? Yes, we have at 120 now on Easy Live Auctions, 140 now, at 140, at 160, at 160, 170 now, at 170 pounds then, at 170, at 170, at 170 pounds. We're all done then. 180, 190 now, at 190, 200 the next bid, at 190, at 190, at 190 pounds, and we're all done then. Wrapping up and selling away at 190. 190 to buyer 658. Lot number 145, bidding straight in at £10. Do we see £12 anywhere? At 10, at 10, at £10 then. £10 bid at 12 with you, sir. In the room at 12. In the room bid taken at £12. At 15 against you, sir. 18 like 18 you have. Your bid, sir, at £18. At £18, 22 against you now, sir. 25 you like? 25 you have, sir. Your bid at £25. Before the internet at 25. At £25 then. With you, sir. In the room at £25. Any advance? At 28 against you now, sir. 30 would you like? 30 you have, sir. Your bid at 30, at 30, at 30. Any advance at 30. In the room, 32 now against you, sir. On Easy Live Auctions at 32. 35 would you like? 35 you have, sir. Your bid at £35 then. At 35, 38 against you now, sir. Out at £38. At £38 on Easy Live Auctions, are we all done then? At £38 then. Fair warning, sir. At £38. Sold to our Easy Live Auctions bid at 38 to buyer 658. Thank you very much. Lot number 146, the Graham Watling here. Bidding straight in at £18, at £18, a modest start, at £18, at 18, 22, 28, 30, 32 now, at £32, at £32, at 32, at 32, at 32, any advance, at £32, it's a gift at £32, it's worth more than this, at £32, at 32, at 32, at 32, any advance, at £32, at £32, 35 is the next bid, at 35, pushing for the bid, James, at £35, any further bidding, at £35 and selling away at £35.
32.
32, sorry, at 32. At £32, my apologies, at £32. Sold £32 to buy at 591. Lot number 147, telephone bidder, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Bidding straight in online at £2,500 is our start. At 2,500 on Easy Live Auctions. 2,600 would you like? At 2,600 with a telephone bidder. At 2,600. At 2,600. 2,700 is the next bid.
2,700.
At 2,600 with the telephone bidder.
2,600.
Yes, that's with you in the room with the telephone bidder at 2,600. Any advance of 2,600? Any interest online or in the room at £2,600? Fair warning then, selling to our telephone bidder at 2,600. Sold 2,600.
C10155, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Lot number 148. Start me off at £200. Looking for 200. Do we see £200 anywhere? Do we see £200 anywhere? Do we see 200? Do we see £200 anywhere? At 200. 200 bid with commission on me at £200 then with me on commission at 200 then at 200 at 200 at £200 then at 220 240 with me then at 240 with me at 240 at 240 at 240 at 240 on commission with me at 240 looking for 260. Do we see 260 there at £240 then selling away to my commission bid at 260 280 with me now at 280 on the books at 280 at 280 at 280 at 280 at £280 then. Do we see 300? Do we see £300 anywhere? Are you coming back in on Easy Live Auctions at 300, at 280 now, with our commission bid at 280, fair warning at £280. It's sold 280 to buyer CT1604. Lot number 149, the Amiga Constellation here. Automatic movement, bidding straight in online at £220 on the sale room at 220. At 220 on the sale room. At £220 on the sale room at 220. At 220 on the sale room. At 220. 240 is the next bid. Do we see 240 anywhere? At 220. At 220. At £220. 240 with you, sir, in the room before the internet at 240. At 240, 260 against you, sir. 280 if you like. 280 you have. Your bid at 280. Room bid taken at 280. At 280, James. At 280. There we are. At £280. Are we all done then? At £280 in the room at 280. Fair warning, your bid, sir, at 280. Sold 280 to buyer 1249. Thank you. Lot number 150. 249. I need to remember that. 249. It's 249, isn't it?
2649?
No, I got a 249 now. Lot 150, bidding straight in at £280 on the sale room at 280, at 280, at 280, at 280, at 280. Any advance at 280, at £280 here for the Amiga, at 280. Are we all done then? At £280. Fair warning, £300 on Easy Live Auctions at 300, at 300, at £300 on Easy Live Auctions at £300. We're all done then. Wrapping up and selling away at £300. Sold 300 to buyer 707. Lot number 151, interest online already, starting us off at 240, 260, 280 with me at 280, with me at 280, 300, bid taken, you're through at 300, 320 is the next bid, do we see 320 anywhere? At 300, 320 online, 340 online now on Easy Live Auctions, at 340, at 340 for the tag here, at 340 then, at 340, any advance at 340, 360 now, at 360, 380 is the next bid, do we see 380 anywhere? At 360, at 360, at £360, are we all done then? At 360, give it a chance at 360, sold 360 to buyer 695. Lot number 152, interest on commission and online. We have commission bid with me at 190, my bid on commission at 190. Commission bid at 190, at 190, at £190. Any advance at 190, 200 is the next bid. Do we see 200 anywhere? At 190, on commission at 190. Fair warning then, selling away at £190. Sold 190 to buyer CT1604. Lot number 153. Start me off at 600, 650 online then, at 650, at 650 then, at £650. 650 is the bid, at 650 on Easy Live Auctions, at 650, at 650. Any advance at £650 then, at 650. Are we selling away at £650 to the maiden bidder at 650? 650 to buyer 597. Lot number 154. We've got competing internet bids and commission bids taking us to £300 with me on commission, at 300 with me on commission, at £300 with me on commission, 320, 330 with me on commission with 330, at 330 with me on commission, at 340 commissions out, at £340 in Easy Live Auctions, at 340, at 340, at £340 then, at 340, at 360 now, at £360 then, at 360, do we see 380? Yes we do, at £380. On Easy Live Auctions at 380, at 380, at £380 then. Are we all done at £380? £400 is the bid, at 400, 420 is the next bid. Do we see 420? At £400 then, at 400, at £400. At £400, selling it away at 400. So 400, yeah, that came after the hammer. £400, get your bids in quicker please. £400 to 694. Lot 155, bidding on commission and on Easy Live Auctions takes us to a bid of £180 online at 180, at 180, at £180 online then, at 180, at £180 then, at 180, at 180, at £180. The maiden bid has it at 180, 180 to buyer 597. Lot number 156, interest on commission and online, taking us to a commission bid of 200, 220 with me at 220, at £220 with me at 220, at 220 on commission, at £220 on commission with me at 220, at 220, at 220, at £220, I can and I will sell at £220, fair warning, sold 220 to buy CT1604. Lot number 156, 156, 157, sorry. Bidding straight in at £600 with me on commission at 600. At £600. At 650, commissions out. At 650, beautiful thing, Jacques Le Coutier, 18 karat gold. At £650. At 650. At 650, 700's next bid is worth that and all. At 700, 650. At 650 on the serum at 650. At 650. At £650. A beautiful watch at 650. Fair warning at 650. Sold 650 to buyer SR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 4. God, I made this long. 156, not 156. Interest online. 158. Sorry. God, I'm doing it again.
What's happened? You must
I don't know. I'm just
uh,
these lights. I don't know what's going on. At 158, not 158. Interest online and on commission, it's taking us to a bid of £110 on the serum at 110. At 110, 120 on these live auctions now. At 120, at 120, at £120 then. At 120, at £120 on these live auctions. Are we all done then? At £120, 130 with you, sir. In the room at 130. At 140 against you, sir. 150 would you like? 150 you have, sir. Your bid at 150. At £150 in the room, beating the internet there. At 150. At 150. At £150. We all done then at 150. Selling to the room at 150. So 150 to buy 249. Remember that time. Thank you. Lot number 159. Bidding straight in at £130. 140 now on the serum at 140. At 140. 150 now on these live auctions at 150. 160 with you in the room. Beating the internet at 160, 170 against you, 180 would you like, 180 too slow, at 180, 190 would you like, 190 too slow again. We're going to let them battle it out here at 220, at 220, at 220, at 220, at £220, 240 would you like, 240 you have, your bid at 240, at 240 in the room at 240, beating the internet there, at £240 then, at 240, your bid at 240, are we all done then at £240? Sold, 2 buyer. 212 for 240. Thank you. Lot 160. Another tag here. Start me off at £250. At 250. At 250. At 250. At 250. At £250 then. At 250. I'm not selling any less than that. It's worth that and everything. At 250. 250. Bid taken online at 250. At 250, at 250, at £250, beautiful watch here, at 250, any advance at £250 then, at 250, at 250, at £250, fair warning, so 250 to buyer 687. Lot number 161, bidding straight in online at 130, 135 with me on commission, at 135 with me on commission. At 100, 140, commissions out at 140, at 140 then, at 140, at 140, at £140, we all done then at 140, 140 to buyer 707. Lot number 162, another tag here, bidding straight in on the internet at £130 on the serum at 130, at 130, at £130 then, at 130, at 140 now on the serum, on his live auctions at 140, at £140 on his live auctions at 140, at 140, any advance at £140 then. We all done then at 140, fair warning 140, sold 140 to buyer 700. Lot number 163, interest on commission and online, wiping the commission bid is our bid on Ease Live Auctions at £320 then, at 320, at 340, at 360 now, at 360. At 360, at £400 then, at £400 on Easy Live Auctions, at 400, 420 now, at 420, at 420, at £420 then, at 420, at 420, at £420, sorry sir, I missed that bit, at 440 with you sir, at 440, at 440 in the room with you sir, at 460 against you, 480 would you like, 480 you have sir, your bid at 480, at 480, 500 against you, 550 would you like. 550 you have, sir. Your bid at 550. At 550. At 550 with you, sir. At 550 in the room. At £550. Fair warning at 550. Your bid, sir, at 550. So 550 to buy at 249. Thank you very much. Lot number 164 has been withdrawn, so moving on to lot number 165. the military style watch here, the black face, beautiful thing. Starting with £100, £100 for this, at 100, at 100, at £100 here. Looking for 100. Do we see £100 anywhere? Do we see 100? Do we see £100? Do we see £100 here? 80 then. Do we see 80? Do we see 80? Water in the mug. Do we see 80? Looking for 80. Do we see 80? £50 then, at 50. I won't go any lower, it's worth that and all. At 50, at 50, at £50 then. At £50, this will remain with us at 50. Fair warning then, at £50. That is unsold. Lot number 166, bidding straight in at £160, wiping our commission out at 160, at 160, at 160 then, at 160, at £160 then, at 160, at 160, at £160 then. We're all done at £160, selling away to our maiden bid at 160. Sold 160 to buyer 598. Lot number 167 has also been withdrawn. So moving on to lot number 168. The Amiga Jumbo watch here. Great thing, bidding straight in at £280 with me on commission, at 280 with me on commission, at 280, 300 commissions out at £300 then, at 300, at £300 then, at £300, at £300, any advance at 300, at 300, at 300, 320 with you sir, in the room at 320, at 320, at £320 then, at £320, fair warning at 320, sold 320 to buyer 249. Thank you very much, sir. Lot number 169. Bidding straight in at £85 with me on commission, at 85 with me on commission, at 85 with me on commission, 90. Commissions out at 90, at 90, at 90. Any advance at 90 then, at £90. Are we all done then? Selling it away at £90. Sold 90 to buyer 602. Still in the sheet. Lot number 170 here. Another watch. The Longines military style watch. Start me off at £120, at 120, at 120, at 120. Do we see 120 for this? Looking for 120. Fabulous watch here. 120, at 120, at 120. At 80 then, at 80, at 80, 120. Bid taken at 120, at £120, and good thing at 120, at 120. Do we see 130 anywhere? Looking for 130, 130 with you, 130 before the internet, at 130 before the internet, 130 in the room, bid taken with you, sir. At 130, looking for 140, 140 against you now, sir. 150 would you like? 150 you have, sir. Your bid at 150, looking for 160. Any advance at 150, at 150, at £150, 160 is the next bid. Do we see £160 anyway? Online or in the room at £150, selling to you, sir, at 150. Oh, we're gonna have to open that up. Sorry, that was on the hammer. At 160, sorry about that. At 160, 170 would be like, sir. No, okay, at £160, selling to the internet, 160. 160 to buyer 707. Lot number 171, interest on commission, taking us to a bid of £240, at 240. At £240 here. For the Art Deco wristwatch, at 240, at 240, at £240 then, at 240, at £240. Are we all done then? Selling away to our commission bidder at 240. 240 to buyer CT1604. Lot number 172. Interest online and on the books, taking us to a bid of £100 with me on commission at 100. At £100 with me, 110, 120 with me. At 120 with me, at 120 with me on commission, 130, 135 with me on commission, at 135 with me on commission, at 135 with me on commission. Next bid's 140, 140, commission's out, at £140 then, at 140, at 140, at 140, at £140. Are we all done then? Selling away to our bidder on the serum at £140. Sold 140 to buyer SR78. 2817. Lot number 173, competing commission bids, taking us to a bid of £1,380 at £1,380, at 138, at 1,380, at 1,380 on commission with me at 1,380. 1,400 is the next bid. Do we see £1,400 anywhere? At 1,380, we're all done then at 1,380. Fair warning. Sold 1,380. 80 to buyer CT1604. Lot number 174, moving on to the blue watches here. Bidding on the internet at £80, at 80 on the serum, at 80 pounds then, at 80, looking for 85. Do we see 85 anywhere? At 80, 85 online now, at 85. Do we see 90? 90 we have, at 90, at 90, at 90 pounds then. 95, at 90, at 90, James, at 90, at 90. At £100 now, at £100, at 100, at 100, at £100, at 100, at 100, 110 against the serum at 110 now, at 110, at 110, at £110. Are we all done then? At 110, are we all done? At £110, fair warning at 110. Sold 110 to buyer 515. Another blue here. Start me off at 70. Do we see 70? Looking for 70 for this watch. Looking for 70. Do we see 70? Looking for 70. At 70. At 70. 50 then, do we see 50? In the room or online at 50, at 50, at 50, at £50 anywhere, at 50, at 50, at 50, at £50 bid, at 50 online then, at 50, at 50, 55 is the next bid, do we see 55 anywhere, at 50 then, at £50, are we all done then? Selling to it, to the main bid at £50, 50 to buy 687. Lot number 176. Start me off at 50. Do we see 50 anywhere? Looking for 50. Do we see 50? Do we see 50? Are we going any lower? 50. At £50 then. At 50. At 50. Do we see 50 anywhere? Online or in the room? At 50. At 50. Do we see 50? Do we see 50? I will go as low as 40. Do we see 40? Looking for 40. At 40 then. Do we see 40? Fair warning at £40. This will remain with us. That lot is passed. Lot number 177, bidding straight in at £80, a bid taken at 80, at 80, at 80, at 80 then, at 85 now, 85 is the bid, at £85 then, do we see 90? 90 we have now, online at 90, at £90 then, at 90, at 90, looking for 95, do we see 95 anywhere, online or in the room, at 95, is that a bid there? Yes you have, at 100, at 95 with you before the internet at 95, with you at 95, 100 is the next bid, with you at 95, 100 against you, 110 with like 110 you have, your bid at 110, your bid at 110 at £110 with you in the front row at 110. At 110 then, at 110, are we all done then? Selling away to you in the front row, 120 against you just before the gavel, are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, at £120 then, online at 120, are we all done then? Selling away at 120. 120 to buy 630. Lot number 178. Start me off at £80. Do we see 80? Do we see 80? Do we see 80? 80 anywhere. Looking for 80. Do we see £80 anywhere? Looking for 80. Great thing at £80. At £80 then. At 80. At 80. At 80. At 80. 50 then. Low as I'll go at 50. Won't go any lower. At £50 then. At 50 is a gift at 50. At 50. At 50. At £50 then. Fair warning at £50. £50 online now. At 50. At 50. On Ease Live Auctions at £50. 55 is the next bid. Do we see £55 anywhere? At 50. At 50. Fair warning then. At £50. I will sell at 50. 50 to buy 691. Competing bids here on lot number 179. We'll be taking the bid on Ease Live Auctions at 95. At £95 and at 95, at 95, 100, at 100, at 100, 110 now, at 110, at 110, at 110, looking for 120, 120 we have now, at 120, 130 now, at 130, at 130, at 130, at £130 then, at 130, we're all done then, at £130, on Ease Live Auctions at 130, fair warning, sold 130 to buyer 687. Lot number 180. We have competing bids here, taking us to a bid of 170 with me on commission at 170 with me, at 170 with me on commission, at 170 with me on commission at 170, at 170, at £170 then, at 180, 190 with me, 200 with me then, at 200 with me, at £200 with me on commission at 200, 220 commissions out at 220, at 220, at 220, at £220 then. Are we all done at 220? Fair warning to what he's over at £220. So 220 to buyer 612. Lot number 181. Current internet bid of £800, 850, 900, 950 with me. At 950 with me on commission at 950. At 950. Do we see £1,000 anywhere? Need 1,000. We need 1,000 here. At 950. Do we see £1,000 anywhere for this? Looking for 1,000. Looking for 1,000. At 950. At 950 then. At 950. At £950. Fair warning at 950. Come in with us. Lot number 182. Bidding. Looking for 250. Do we see 250? Looking for 250. Do we see 250 anywhere? looking for 250. For the road exit, 250, looking for 250. Do we see 250 anywhere? Fair warning then at £250 this will remain with us. Lot number 183, bidding straight in at £280, online at 280, at £280 and at 280, at 280, at £280, at £280 on Easy Live Auctions at 280, at £280 then at 280, 280, at £280, we're all done then, selling it away at 280, 280 to buy at 602. Lot number 184, bidding straight in at £260 on Easy Live Auctions at 260, at £260 then, at 260, at £260, we're all done then, at £260, fair warning, 260, to buy at 612. Lot number 185, bidding straight in at £80 then, at 80 looking for 5, do we see 85 anywhere, at £85 now online, at 85 looking for 90, at £90 now, at 90, 90's the bid, at 95 now, looking for 100, do we see 100 anywhere, 100 at £100 now online, at 100, at 100 then, at £100, are we all done then, at £100, 110 now, at 110, looking for 120, do we see 120 anywhere, looking for 120, we have 120 now on Easy Live Auctions at £120, at 120, at £120 then, fair warning at 120, sold 120 to buy 658. Lot number 186. Bidding straight in at £1,500. At 1,500 looking for 1,600. 1,600's bid at £1,600 then. 1,700's the next bid. Do we see 1,700 anywhere? In the room or online at 1,700. At £1,600 then. At £1,600. Fair warning then at £1,600. Are we all done at 1,600? Sold 1,600 to buy at 612. Thank you. Lot number 187. Start me off at £200. Do we see £200? This unusual thing at £200. At £200. Looking for 200. Do we see £200? 150 anywhere. Looking for 150. Do we see 150 anywhere? Looking for 150. At 150. At 150. At £150. £100 and low as I go is £100. Do we see £100 anywhere? It's worth that. At £100, at £100 then, at £100 bid, at 100, looking for 110. Do we see £110 anywhere? At 100, at 100 then, at £100, at £100 then, at 100, 110 now's bid, online at 110, at 110 then, at 120 now, at 120, at 120, at £120 then. Do we see 130 anywhere? Looking for 130. Do we see 130 anywhere? Looking for 130, at 130 now, at £130 online at 130, looking for 140. Do we see £140 anywhere? 140 now online at 140, at 140, at £140, 150's bid now, at 150, at 150, at 150, any advance at 150, at £150, at 150, any advance at £150, I can and will sell at 150. Fair warning then to our Easy Life bidders at £150, gavel's going down at 150, sold 150, to buy at 660. Thank you very much. Lot number 188, competing bids been wiped out by our bid on Easy Live Auctions of £1,200, at 1,200, at £1,200 then, at £1,200. Any advance at £1,200. Fair warning then, selling away to our Easy Live bidder at 1,200. So 1,200 to buy at 602. Lot number 189, commission bids competing there at £2,400 with me on commission, at 2,400 with me on commission, at 2,400. At £2,400 with me on commission, 2,500 is the next bid. £2,400 with me on commission, looking for 2,500. Do we see £2,500 anywhere? Looking for 2,500. At £2,400, fair warning at 2,400. So £2,400 to CT1604. Lot number 190. We've got various competing commission bids here, but I have to start at £1,580 on commission. At 1,580. At 1,580. 1,600 the next bid. At 1,580. Looking for 1,600. Any advance at £1,580. Fair warning then, selling away to our commission bidder at 1,580. Sold 1,580 to CT1604. Lot number 191, bidding straight in at £1,600 on commission, £1,700 now online, and £1,700 on the Serum at 1,700. At 1,800 now on Easy Live Auctions, at 1,800, at 1,800, at 1,800, 1,900 is the next bid, at £1,800. Are we all done then at £1,800? Fair warning, selling away to our Easy Live bidder at 1,800. 1,800 to 665. Thank you. Lot number 192, competing commission bids here, taking us to a bid of 1,120 at £1,120. At 1,120. 1,120. £1,200 now. Commissions are out at £1,200. At £1,200. Are we all done then? Selling it away at 1,200. Sold 1,200 to our bidder 634. Lot on 193. We've got a telephone bidder. Are we ready?
Trying to connect, sir. Yeah, we're here.
We're here.
Okay, lovely, thank you, sir.
We're here. Okay. Ready on telephone, ready online, bidding straight in at £1,600. At 1,600. 1,700 would they like? At 1,600. They're out already on the telephone. They're out on the telephone, through online at £1,600. Are we all done then at 1,600? Yes, we are at £1,600 to buy at 597. Lot number 194, bidding straight in at £800. With me on commission at 800. With me on commission at £800 then. At 800, looking for 850. Do we see 850 anyway? 850 we have online now. Commissions are out at 850. Easy Live Auctions is through at £850 then. At 850. At 850. Selling away then at £850. Sold 850 to buy at 612. Telephone bidder, are we ready, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Lot number 195. We have competing bids here, taking us to a bid of 1,360, 1,400. 1,400 we have online now, 1,500 is the next bid. We're out on commission at £1,400, 1,500 is the next bid. Are we back on the telephone?
I'm just trying again, sir.
Let's try them again, we'll wait for the time being. Current bid is £1,400, at £1,400 here, at £1,400, at £1,400, at £1,400.
Yeah, okay, the bid's 1,500.
Would like to do 1,500.
Right, okay. All right, thank you.
They're out on the telephone at £1,400, selling away at 1,400.
Okay.
£1,400 to buyer 718. Lot number 196. Fantastic pair of candlesticks here. Starting me off at £100. At £100. At £100 then. At £100. Do we see £100 in the room or online? At £100. I won't go any lower. They're worth that. At £100. At 100. At 100. At £100 then. These will remain with us at 100. That lot is passed. Lot number 197. Bidding straight in on Easy Live at 240. That's with me at 240. With me at 240. Looking for 260. 250 will do that. We'll look at 250. Do we see 250 anywhere? Looking for 250. Do we see 250? Do we see 250? Do we see 250 anywhere? Looking for 250. Fair warning then at £250. That lot is passed. Lot number 198. 120's bid at 120, looking for 130. Do we see £130 anyway? At 120, at 120, at £120 then. At 120, at £120 then. Are we all done at £120? The maiden bid has it at 120. 120 to buy 574. Lot number 199, bidding on the internet and on commission, taking us to a bid of 170 with me, on commission at 170. On commission at 170 then. At 170. At 170. At 170 then. At £170. At 170. Are we all done? 180. 190 with me. At 190 with me. Looking for 200. Do we see 200 anywhere? Looking for 200. It's worth that. 200 to 20 with me. 230 with me. At 230 with me. On commission at 230. At 230. at 240, commissions out at £240 then, at 240, at 240, at £240. Are we all done at 240? Fair warning at 240. 240 to buy at 718, thank you. Lot number 200, bidding online, we need £800, looking for £800. At 780 is the bid, at 780, sorry, 750, looking for 800. At 750, looking for £800. At 750, looking for 800. Do we see £800 anywhere? George and silver fiddles, pattern spoons, each with the fleur-de-lis on them. Really interesting things. At £750 then. At 750. Do we see 800 anywhere? Looking for 800. Fair warning, at 750, these will remain with us. Lot number 201. Start me off. Bidding straight in at £120 on commission at 120. At £120 with me on commission. At 120. At 120. At £120 then. At 120. 130. 140 with me. At £140 with me. At 140, 160 £160 with me on 160. On commission at 160. 170. Commissions out at £170 then. At 170. At 170. At £170 and fair warning, we're all done at 170. 170 to buy at 673. Lot number 202. Competing commission bids here, taking us to a bid of £400 online at 400, at £400 then, at £400, at 400, at £400 then. Are we all done at £400? Does main bid have it at £400? Fair warning at 400. £400 to buy at 578. Thank you. Lot number 203. We've got competing bids here, taking us to a bid of £75 on eZive Auctions at 75, at 75, at £75 in, at 75, any advance at £75, fair warning and selling it away at £75, sold 75 to buy at 637. Lot number 204, start me off at £400. Do we see £400 for these pieces? Looking for 400. Do we see £400 anywhere? Do we see 400? £300 then. Do we see £300? Looking for £300 then. Do we see 300? Do we see £300 anywhere? Looking for 300. £250 then. Do we see 250? Do we see 250? Any interest at £250? 250. Bid taken at 250. At 250. At £250 then. At 250. At £250. Are we all done then? At £250. Fair warning at 250. Sold 250 to buy at 673. Number 205, bidding straight in at £160, at 160, at 160, at 160, 170 with you, sir, in the room at 170, 180 against you, 190, like 190 you have, sir, your bid at £190, and in the room at 190, at 190, at £190, and we're all done at £190, fair warning, sold, 124, 190, thank you. Lot number 206. Bidding straight in at £70, online at 70, at 70, at 70, at £70, at 75 with you, sir, at 75 in the room, at 75 in the room at 75, at 75 in the room then, at 70, 80 against you, sir, 85 you'd like. Shake the head at 85. In the, on the eZive Auctions at £80 then, fair warning at 80. Lot number 207, start me off, bidding straight in at £95 and at 95, at £95 and at 95, any further interest at £95, at £95, do we see 100, 100 online now, at £100, at 100, at £100 and at £100, at 100, at 100, at £100, fair warning and selling away at 100, sold £100 to buyer 542. Lot number 208, bidding straight in at 110, at 110, at £110 and at 110, 120 with you, sir, in the room at 120, in the room at £120 and at 120, at 120, 130 against you, sir, 140 if you like. Shave the head at 140, biddings in at £130 on eZive Auctions at 130, at £130, fair warning. To buy at 542. Lot number 209, bidding straight in at £80, at 80, at £80 then, at 85 now, at 85, do we see 90, 90 anywhere, 90 in the room before the internet, 95 against you, sir, at 100, 110 now, at 110 then, at 110, 120 with you, sir, at £120 in the room, and 130 against you now, 140, like to shake the head, 140, at £130 then, at 130, at 130, any advance, 140, back in, sir, at £140 with you, sir, in the room, at 140, 150 against you, shake the head at 150, at £150 online then, at 150, at £150, fair warning at 150, 150 to buy at 621. Lot number 210 bidding straight in at £65. Do we see 70 anywhere? Do we see 70? Looking for 70. 70 with you, sir. Before the internet at 70. At £70 then. At 70. At 75 against you, sir. 80 we'd like. 80. 80 online already. At 80. At 80. At £80 then. At 80. Are we all done then? At £80. 85 now on Easy Live Auctions. At 85. At 90 now. At 90. 90 is the bid. At 90. Do we see £95 anywhere? At 90. At 90 then. At £90. We're all done then. Wrapping up and selling away at 90. Fair warning. 90 sold to buy at 621. Lot number 211 bidding straight in at £120 at 130, 140, at £140 then, at 140, 150 now, at 150, at 150, at £150 for this unusual vinaigrette, at 160 now, at 160, at 160, at £160 then, at 160, are we all done then, at £160, 170 now, at 170, at £170 then, at 170, do we see £180 anywhere? Any advance, £170, fair warning at 170, sold £170 to buy at 542. Lot 212 bidding straight in at £80. Any advance at 80? At 80, at £80, do we see £85 anywhere? At 80, 85 with you in the room, sir. At £85 in the room at 85. At 85, 90 against you. £90 on the sale room at 90. At £90 on the sale room at £90. At 90, at 90, bid taken on the sale room at £90. We're all done 95 against the sale room now on Easy Live Auctions. At 95, you're coming back in, sir, about £100. Do we see £100 anywhere? At £95, online at 95, selling it away at 95. £95 to buy at 542, sorry. Lot number 213, bidding straight in at £80. Do we see £85 anyway? 85 with you, sir. In the room at 85. At 90 against you now, sir. At 95 against you now, sir. 100 would you like? Shake your head at 100. 100 online now. At 110 now. At 110. At 110. At 110. Looking for 120. Do we see £120 anywhere? All happening on Easy Live Auctions at 120 now. At 120, looking for 130. Do we see £130 anywhere? Yes, we do. At 130 now. At 130. At £130 then. At 130. At 140 now. At £140. At £140 now. Online at £140. We all done then. At 140. Sold £140 to buy at 542. Another vinaigrette here, bidding straight in at £60. 65 with me, 70 with me, at £70 with me on commission at 70, at 70, 75 now, at 75, bid taken at £75 online at 75, at 75 then, looking for 80, do we see 80, 80 with you, sir, in the room at 80, at £80 before the internet, at 80 in the room, at 85 against you now, sir, at 85, 90 you have, sir, your bid at 90, at £90 then, at 90, looking for 95, any advance at 90, at £90 then, are we all done then, selling away at £90 to a room bidder at 90, 95 just before the hammer, sir, 100 we like, 100 you have, sir, your bid at £100, at 100, at 100, at £100 and at 100, selling away to you, sir, at 100, it's yours, at 124, thank you, £100. Lot number 215, we've got competing bids here, taking us to a bid of £100 on commission at 100, at £100 on commission, at £100 on commission, at £100 on commission with me at 100, at 100, at £100.
Sorry.
130 with me then, at 130, at 130 with me, at 140, 145 with me, at 145 with me, at 145 with me, at £145 with me on commission. At 150, commissions are out at £150 then, at 150, at 150, any advance at £150, we all done then, selling away at 150, has sold £150 to buy 673. Lot number 216, competing commission bids here, taking us to a bid of £440 online at 440, at £440 then, at 440, at 440, at £440, 460 is next bid. Do we see £460 anywhere? At 440, at £440 then, at 440, Fair warning then, selling away at 460 to you, sir. In the room at 460. At £460 then. Are we all done then? At £460. Sold 460 to buyer 1, 2, 4. Lot number 117, switching sides here on the clerking table. Alright, are we ready to go? We're ready to go. Alright, lot number 217. Competing bids here take us to a sale bid of £150 at 150, at 170 now, at 170, at 180, at 190, at 190, 200 now, at £200 then, at 200, at 200, at £200, at 200, 220 now is a bid, at 220, at £220, we all done then, came at 220, sold to 20 to buy SR 1958256. Lot number 200. Sorry, James. Okay. There you go. Lot number 218, bidding straight in at at £80. We're straight in at 80, at £80 then, at 80, at £80 for this, at 80, at 80, at £80 then. Are we all done? At £80 on commission at 80, at 85, at 90 now with me on commission, at 95, at £100 with me on commission now, at 100, 100 with me, 110, 120 with me. 120 with me, at 130, 140 with me, 150 with me, at £150 with me, 160, commission's out at 160, at 160 then, at £160, at 160, are we all done then, at 170 now, at £170 then, at 170, at 170, at 180 now, at £180 then, at 180, at 180, at 180, 190 now, do we see 200 in the room or online, or £200, do we see 200, at £190, at 190, at 190, we all done then at 190, fair warning at 190, sold £190 to buy at 580. Again, I think we'll switch over here.
Yeah.
Good to go?
Yeah.
Good to go. Alright, lot number 219, at 219, start me off. Bidding straight in at £60 with me on commission, at 60 on commission, at 60 on commission with me, at 60, at 60, at £60 then, any advance at 60, 65, 70 with me on commission, at 70 with me on commission at 70, 75, 80 with me on commission now, at 80 with me on commission at 80, at 80, 85, 90 with me on commission at 90, 95 commissions out, at £95 on these live auctions now, at 95, at £95 then, are we all done? At £95, fair warning at 95, sold £95 to buy at 673. Lot number 220, bidding straight in at £160 on the Serum at 160, at 160, 170 now, at 170, at 170, at 170 now, at 180, at 180 now, at 180, at 180, at 190 now, at 190, at £200 now on the Serum at 200, at 200, 220 now, on these live auctions at 220, at 220, at £220, are we all done then at 220, on these live auctions at 220, fair warning. Sold £220 to buyer 543. Lot number 221, bidding straight in at £570, at 570, at 570, £600 bid, at £600 and commissions are out, at £600, at 600, at £600, are we all done then? At £600, fair warning at £600, sold 600 to buy at 578. Lot number 222, we've got bidding straight in at £500, wiping the commission bids out at 500, at £500 and at £500. Are we all done then at £500? Any advance at 500? 550 is the next bid. Do we see 550 anyway at £500 then? Fair warning at 500. 578. Lot number 223, bidding straight in at £170, at 170, at £170 then, at 170, at 170, at £170 then, at 170. Any advance at 170, 180, at 180 now, at 180, at 180, at £180 then, at 180. To any advance at £180 then, at £180. On these live auctions at 180. 180 to buy at 542. Lot number 224, bidding straight in at £220, at 220, at £220, at 220. Do we see 240, 260 now, at 260, at 260, 280 now, at £280, online at £300 now, at 300, at £300. Beautiful Art Nouveau vases here, at £300, at 300, at £300. And are we all done then? At £300, fair warning, selling away to our easy life bidder at 300. Sold £300 to buy 673. Lot number 225. Competing bids here, taking us to a bid of £200 with me on commission. At £200 with me on commission. 260, commissions out at £260 then, at 260, at £260 then, at 260, at £260. Any advance at £260. Fair warning, selling away to our easy life bidder at 260. Sold 260 to buy 578. Lot number 226, bidding straight in at £80 with me on commission, at £80 with me on commission at 80, at 80, at £80 then, at £80, any advance at 80, 85 with me, 90 with me now, at 90 with me, on commission at 90, at £90 with me on 95 commissions out, at £95. Easy life bidder goes through at £95 then, at 95, at £95. Fair warning then, selling it away at £95. 95 to buy at 673. Thank you. Lot number 227, bidding straight in at £800, at £800, at 800, at £800, at £800, at £800, at £800, at 800, at 800, at £800 on commission at 800. We're all done then. At £800, fair warning. 800 to buyer CT1604. Lot 228. We've got competing commission bids here taking us to £150 at 150 with me on commission at 150. At 150, 160, 170 with me now, 170. At £170 with me on commission. At 180, 190 with me. At 190 with me. At 200, 220 with me now. At 220. At 220 with me on commission. 240, 260 with me on commission. At £260 with me on commission. 280, £300 with me on commission. At £300. At £300 with me on commission. At 300. Any advance at 300. 320 to the next bid. At £300 at on commission. Selling away to our commission bidder at £300. Sold 300 to buy at CT1604. Lot number 229, bidding straight in at £240, wiping out our commission bid at 240, at £240 on these live auctions at 240, at £240 in, at 240, at £240, fair warning at 240. 260, just on the hammer. I'm going to have to take that bid at 260, at 260, at 280 now, at 280, at 280, at 280, 300 is the next bid. Do we see £300 in here? Looking for 300 at £280 and fair warning, gavels raised at 280. They sold 280 to buy 663. Lot number 230. Starting off at £100. Do we see £100 this? Looking for £100 at 100, at £100, at £100 from a good local home. At £100 then. At 100. At £100. At £100. At £100. 90 then. I won't go any lower. It's worth that at 90. At 90. At £90 then. Fair warning at £90 to remain with us. That order's passed. Lot 231, bidding straight in at £1,500, looking for 1,500 and looking for 1,600. £1,500 bid, 1,600 now online at 1,600. At £1,600. At £1,600 then. At £1,600. Any advance at £1,600 then. Fair warning, selling away to our easy bid at 1,600. Sold 1,600 to buy at 621. Lot number 232. We've got competing commission bids. £1,300 with me. £1,300 with me. Yeah. £2,300 I need. Yeah, sorry, my apologies. 2,300 I need. I need 2,300. I don't think this is going to sell. Fair warning, that lot has passed. Lot 233, start me off bidding straight in at 2,800, 2,950 with me, at 2,950 with me on commission, at 3,400, that's the way to do it, at £3,400 then, at 3,400, at £3,400 then, at £3,400, 3,600 is the next bid, do we see £3,600 anywhere, at 3,400, at 3,400, at £3,400, 3,400, 2 by 665, thank you. Lot number 234, bidding straight in at 120, 130 with me on commission, at 130 with me on commission, 140, 150 with me on commission, 160 with me, at 170 with me then, at 170 with me, at £170 with me on commission, at 170, 180, 190 with me on commission, at £190 with me on commission, at 200, 220 with me on commission then, at 220 with me, at 220, 240, 260 with me then, at 260, at 260, at 260, 280, £300 with me on commission, at £300, at £300, 320, 340 with me on commission, at 340 with me on commission, 380, 390 with me on commission, 390, at 390, at 400, bids through, at £400, commissions out, at £400, at 400, at £400, easy life bidder goes through at £400 then, fair warning at £400, all done at 400, sold £400, 2 by 673. Lot number 235, bidding straight in at 85, 90, 95 with me on commission, at £95 with me on commission, at 95 with me, at 100, at 110, at 130 now, at 130, at 140, 150 then, at 150, at 150, at 150, commissions out at 150, 160 now online, at 160, at 160, at £160, at 160, at £160, then fair warning 160, to buy at 673. Lot number 236, bidding straight in at £240, wiping out my commission bid at 240, great bit of Irish silver here, at £240, at 260, 280 we'd like sir, 280, 280 your bid sir, in the room at 280, at 280, at £280 with you sir, 300 against you, 320 with you sir, in the room at 320, at 320, at 320, at 320, in the room at 320, any further bidding at £320, fair warning your bid sir, at £320, that's yours, 239, 320, thank you. We have competing bids here for the collection of Irish cutlery, provincial silver, lot 237, bidding straight in from Ireland at £1,200, at £1,200, at £1,200, at £1,200 for the Irish bidder at £1,200. Any advance at £1,200, selling away at 1,200, sold £1,200 to buy at 522. Lot number 238, we've got bids taking us to £120 to begin with, at 120, at 120, at 120, at £120 then, at 120, 130, 140 with me, at £140 with me on commission, at 140, at 150, 160 with me on commission, at 160, 170, 180 with me on commission, at £180 with me on commission, at £180, at 180, at 180, at £180. We all done that at £180. Fair warning. Sold 180 to buy CT1604. Lot 239. We've got again competing bids here, taking us to a start of £120 with me on commission. At 120, at 120, 130, 140 with me. At 140 with me, 150, 160 with me. At 160 with me, on commission at 160, at £160 then, at 160, at 160, at £160, 170, 180 with me sir, at £180 with me sir, 190 would you like? 190, 190 you have, 200 with me, at £200 with me on commission, 220 you have, commissions out at £220 with you sir, at 220, in the room at 220, fair warning, sending away to you sir, at 220, sold by 1, 4, 2, 4, 220, thank you. Lot 240, competing bids here, taking us to £120 at 120, at 120, at £120 then, at 120, at 120, at 130, 140 with me then, at 140 with me, at 140, 150, 160 with me, at 160 with me, at 160, at 160, 170, 175 with me, at £175 with me on commission, at 175, at 175 with me, at £175 then. Are we all done? At £175 on commission at 175. Sold 175 to buyer CT1604. Lot number 241. Bidding straight in at £100, at £100, at £100, at £100, 110, 120 with me, at 120 with me, at 130, 140 with me, at 140 with me, at 150, 160 with me, at 160 with me, at £160 with me on commission, 170, 180 with me on commission, at £180 with me on 190, £200 with me on commission now, at 200, 240 with me on commission, at 240, £280 with me on commission, at 280, at £280 with me on commission, £320 with me on commission now, at 320, at 320, at £320, 340, 360 with me on commission, at 360, on commission, at 380, £400 with me now on commission at 400, at £400. 420 is the next bid. Do we see £420 anywhere? At 400, at £400 then. At £400, selling away to our commission bidder at 400. Sold £400 to buy at CT1604. Lot number 242, bidding straight in at £120 for this 18th century snuff box at 120, at £120 then, at 120, at £120 then, at 120, looking for 130, do we see 130 anywhere? Looking for 130, at £120, and I can and I will sell at £120, fair warning at 120, sold 120 to buy at 631. Lot number 243. We have a bid on the internet here at 150, 160, at 160, 180 now, at 180, 190, £200 now, at 200, 220, 240, at 240, at 240, at 240, 260 is the next bid. Do we see 260 anywhere? Beautiful clock at £240, looking for 260. Do we see 260? At 240 then, at 260 with you, sir, in the room at 260. Room bid at £260, 280 against you, 300 would you like, sir? At 280 then, at £280, at 280. Fair warning, we all done at 280. Sold £280 there to buy SR 23072. Lot 244, bidding straight in at £120 online at 120, at 120, at 120, at 120, at 120, 130, 130 before the internet. That was been taken 140 now on the internet, 150 would you like, sir? At 150 in the room now, at 150, at 150, room bid at 150. Kim, room bid at £150, at 160 against you, sir. 170 would you like? 170, your bid, sir, at 170 then, at 170, at 170, at 180 against you now, at 180. On the Sarah at 180. 190 with you, sir, at £190 with you, sir, at 190 in the room, at 190, 200 against you now. And on the Easy Life, sorry, Sarah Auctions at £200. At 220 on Easy Life Auctions, 240 like, sir? 240. In the room at 240. In the room at 240. Bidding in the room at £240. Any advance at 240. At £240, fair warning at 240, with our persistent room bidder at £240. Is sold. 240 to buy at 249. Thank you. Sarah Mortons, see one.
Hello. Just make sure you say Sarah.
Yeah, sorry, it's just, there's a lot going on. Very
Very
nice.
well.
Yeah, it's impossible to do. Bidding straight in at £4,200. At £4,200 on Easy Life Auctions. At £4,200. At £4,200. And any advance at £4,200. At £4,200. Any advance at £4,200. Selling away at £4,200. It's sold £4,200 to buy at 711. Lot number 246. We've got competing commission bids here, which have been wiped out by our Easy Live Auctions bid at 340, at 340, at £340 to the half sovereign, at 340, any advance at 340, at £340, then selling away at 340. It's sold 340 to buy at 560. Lot number 247. Bidding straight in at £750 then, at 750, at 750, at £750. Any advance at £750? Fair warning. 750 to buy at 502. Lot number 248, bidding in at 750 again, at 750, at 750. Any advance at £750? Fair warning. 750 to buy at 718. Lot number 249, bidding straight in at 700, at £700, at £700. Can we go in tens, please? At £700, at £700. Give them a chance. At 710 now, at 710, at 710, at 710. Looking for 720. Do we see 720 anywhere? At £710. Fair warning at 710. Sold. £710 to buy at 718. Lot number 250. Bidding in at 650, 670 with me on the books. At £670 with me on the books. Let's go in tens again. At 670 with me on the books, looking for 680. 680's bid. 690 is the next bid. Do we see 690 anywhere? For the sovereign at 690. At £680. Are we all done at 680? Fair warning. Sold. 680 to buy at 718. Lot number 251, bidding straight in at 2,200, 2,230 with me on commission at 2,230. At 2,230, next bid's 2,300. We'll do 2,400 bid. At 2,400, commission's out. At £2,400 then. At 2,400. At £2,400. Are we all done then? At £2,400, selling away to our easy low bidder at 2,400. Sold. £2,400 to buy at 590. Lot number 252. We've got competing commission bids here, taking us to a bid of £650. At 650. At 650. At £650. Let's go in tens for this, please. At 650. At 650. 670 now. At 670. Looking for 680. Any advance at £670. Fair warning at 670. 690 now. At 690. At 690. Do we see 700? Looking for 700. At £690. Fair warning. Sold. 690 to buy 560. Lot number 253, bidding straight in at £700. Again, let's go in tens. At 700, at £700, at £700. Do we see 710 anywhere? At 700, at £700. Fair warning at 700. Sold. 700 to buy 560. Lot number 254, bidding straight in at £850, at 850, at 850, at 850, 900 is the next bid. Do we see 900 anywhere? Looking for 900 at 850, at 850, at 850, at £850, and we're all done then. At 850, fair warning.
Oh, that was after.
850,
No, it's fine.
5511.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to my last page. At 255, bidding straight in at £950. At 950, at 950 then, at 950, at 950, at £950. Are we all done then? At £950, fair warning. Sold. 950 to buyer 502. Lot number 256, bidding straight in at £700. At 700, at £700 then, at £700. Are we all done then? At £700, 750 with you, sir. At 750, at 750, at 750, at 750 with you, sir. At £750 then. Are we all done then? At £750 with you, sir. At 750. Sold. 750 to buyer 124. Thank you. Lot number 257, bidding straight in at £360. At 360, at 360, at £360. 380 is the next bid. At 360. Are we all done then? At £360. So 360 to buy at 505. Lot number 258, bidding straight in again at £360. At 360, at 360, at 360, at £360. Fair warning. 360 to buy 505. Lot number 259, bidding in once again is straight in at £360. Fair warning at 360. Then 360 to buy 505. Lot number 260, bidding once again in at 360. Fair warning at 360. Sold. 360 to buy 505. God, bit petted. Lot number 261, bidding straight in at 750 this time. At 750. At 750. At 750 pounds. Are we all done at 750? Sold. 750 pounds to buy 502. My last lot of today at lot 262, bidding straight in at 700 pounds, at 700 pounds on Easy Live Auctions at 700, at 700 pounds, at 700 pounds. We all done then at 700 pounds. Fair warning. Sold. 700 to buy 548. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you, William, there. Okay, moving on now to lot number 263, and 480 is bid now. £700 is bid now. £700 on Easy Live Auction Rooms at £700 at 700. Any advance at 700 at 700 then. Selling at £700 on Easy Live Auctions at 700, all done. £700 is buy at 548. Lot number 264. And I'm bid £700 on Easy Live Auctions at 700 then, at 700. Could we go in 20 please for these? So looking for 720 then please, at 700 then, at 700. Any interest at 700 then, at £700 then, online on Easy Live Auctions at 700, we all done. 700 is buy 548 on Easy Live Auctions there. Lot 265, £340 is bid on Easy Live Auctions then at 340, at 340, at 340 then, at 340. Any advance at 340 then, and selling then at £340. £340 is buy 560 this time. Moving on swiftly, lot 266 and £360 is bid at 360 then, at 360, at £360 at 360. Any advance at £360, Easy Live Auctions then at 360. 360 is buy at 505. Lot number 267, £750 is bid at 750, at 750, at 750 on Easy Live Auctions at 750. Looking for 800 please, Sarah, at £750 then, at 750. Any advance then? You coming in, Sarah? At £750 then, last chance, Sarah, I sell at 750. 750 is buy at 578. Lot number 268 now, and I bid £750 then on Easy Live Auctions at 750. At 750 then, at £750 then, at 750. At 750. All done then, and selling at 750. £750, Easy Live Auctions 502. Lot 269 now, and I bid £700 then on Easy Live Auctions at 700. Looking for 20 please. At 700, I need 20 please. At £700 then, at 700. Any advance then? I selling at £700 then. All done. Selling at £700. £700 is buyer 548. Moving on to lot 270 now, and I bid 2,400. I've got £2,450 then. 2,450. If we go 50s, please.
You asking 2,450?
I've got 2,450. I'm looking for 2,500.
Okay.
At £2,450 then, at 2,450. All done then. I'm selling then. It's my commission bid at £2,450. 2,450 is buy at 5,929. Lot number 271. We have a telephone bid for this.
Gordon?
Is there a telephone bid for this? You've got £750 then on Easy Live Auctions at £750 then. That's 750. That's £750 then. Could we go in 20s? Is that alright, please? So I'm looking for 760 now.
Is there a telephone bid on 271?
That's 750.
Yes,
then.
so we're on 271 now.
Is there a telephone bid?
Yes.
Okay, we have a telephone bid for this, so we are going to just hold on for this telephone bid. If you just bear with me, my colleague will be rushing through this door now, out of breath, no doubt, and walking with one full leg. And here he comes now, the light's on, he's on his way, he's coming through the doors, we can all see him. Here he is, look, here he is. He's on the telephone. No, he's not on the telephone. He is on the telephone. It's the same person, we're being told, so they're on the telephone and they're coming through now. If we just hold on that little bit longer, we will get there. And Gordon, are we through to the telephone bidder? No, we're not on, we're not on the telephone. We are on the telephone. We're not on the telephone, but we are up to £750. I'm looking for £760, Gordon. We've got 750, so just that £10. Hopefully it'll be worth it because we've all been waiting for this call. Are we nearly there, Gordon? Are we nearly there? No?
Answer phone, sir.
Answer phone, sir. Okay. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to move on then. So it's £750 then. I will sell at £750. All done at £750. £750 is sold to buyer 502. Lot number 272 now is up to £750 then on Easy Live Auctions at 750. £750 then at 750. Any advance then? All done and selling at 750. 750 is buyer 578 to Easy Live Auctions. Lot number 273. Could be going 10s for this one, please. And we're up to 240. I'm looking for 250. 340. Looking for 350, please. At 340 then. At 340. At 340. Selling at £340. All done at 340. 340 is buyer 505. Lot number 274. Can we go in 10s for this one as well, please? Doesn't really appear to be working, but we'll continue trying. 340 looking for 350 then, please. At 340 then, at 340 then, at 340, at 340 pounds then. All done at 340. At £340 is buyer 578. Lot number 275 now, the half sovereign there, and £340 is bid on Easy Live Auctions at 340, at 350 now, at 350, at 350, at 350. Any advance at 350 then? I sell at £350, all done at 350. £350 is buyer 718. Lot number 276, and I'm up to 700, looking for 720, please. At 700 then, looking for 720 then. Two half sovereigns there, at 700, at £700 then, at 700, all 720, thank you, at 720, at 720 then. All done, and selling at £720. 720 is buyer 718, the same buyer as last, thank you. Lot 277 then, and looking for 720 then, please. At 720 then, please. Looking for 720. At £700 then, are we all done? Selling at £700. £700 is buyer 548. Lot number 278, and we're up to £700 then. Looking for 720 then, please. At 700 then. At 700. At 700. Any advance then? At £700, all done at 700. £700 now is buyer 548. Lot number 279, the full sovereign there, and straight in at £700 again on Easy Live Auctions at 700. At 700 then, we're looking for 720 please, at 700 then. All done at 700. £700 is buyer 548. Lot number 280 now, the full sovereign there. It says full sovereign and dragon, yep, £700 is bid, looking for 720 please, at 700 then, at 700, at £700 then, at 700, any advance then, Easy Live Auction has his at 700, 700 is buyer 548. Lot number 281 now, and I bid £150 now on Easy Live Auctions at 160 now on Easy Live Auctions at 160. Easy Live Auctions at 160 then. Any advance at £160. Good collection there. 170's bid. 170, 180 bid. 180 at 180. £180 at 180. Any advance at 180. Sarah, you're coming in at 180 then. At 180. £180 then. Selling at 190 now. At 190. 200 bid. At 200 now. At 200. At 200. Any advance at £200. Are we all done and wrapping up? Then I'm selling at £200, all done at 200. £200 is sold to buyer 530. 133. If you just wait there one moment, Ali. Lot number 282 now. £85 is bid at 85 then, at 85 then, 85, 95, 110, 130, 150, 160 bid, £160 is bid at 160, at 160, at 160. Any advance at 160 now, at 160. We're all done at 170, 180 bid, 180, at 180, at 180, at £180 at 190 bid, £200 is bid, at 200, at 200. All on Easy Live Auctions now, at 220s now bid, at 240 bid, at £240, at 240, at 240 then, at 240 then, 260 bid, 280 bid, at £280 then. At 280, at 280, at £300, at 320 then, at 320 now, at 320, at 320, any advance then, 340 bid, at £340 now, at 340 then, at 360s bid, at 360, thank you Kelly, at 360, 380s bid, £400 now, it's rolling on at 400 then, at 400, any advance Easy Life please, at £400 then, at 400, at £400, last chance, the gavel is raised, at 400, all done at £400. £400 is buyer 523. There you go, Alistair. Thank you. Lot number 283 now, and I bid £70 on Easy Live Auctions at 70, at 70, at 80, at £80 bid, at £80, at £90 is bid, at 90, at 90, any advance at 90, £100 is bid, at 100 now, at 100, 120 bid. At 120, at 140 bid, at £140, at 140, at 140, at 140, 150s bid, at 150 then, at 150, at £150 then, at 150, at 150, at £150 then, at 160, at 160, at 160, at 160, any advance then, at £160 then, at £160, we all done, and selling at 160, 170s bid now, at 170, at 170, at £170 then at 170. Are we all done at 170? I'm selling at £170. All done. Last chance at 170. 170 is sold to buyer 588. Lot number 284 now, and I'm bid 440 now on Easy Live Auctions at 440 then. At 440. Any advance at 440. At £440 then at 440. At £440 then. Are we all done at 440? It's the maiden bid on Easy Live Auctions at £440. All done, I will sell at 440. 440 is buyer 550. Moving on now to lot 285 now, £60 is bid on Easy Live Auctions at 65 now, 65 on the sale room, 65 on the sale room. Sale room bidding at 65 then, at £65 on sale room at 70 now, 75 on the sale room, £75, sale room bidding at 75. Easy Live you coming in at 80, £80 is bid, 85 now, sale room bidding at 85, at 85, at £90 now, at £90 on Easy Live Auctions at 90. At £90, at 90, any advance there? At £90, at 90. Sarah, you coming in at 90. At £90, are we all done at 90 then? I'm selling at £90, fair warning at 90. £90 is buyer 515. Moving on swiftly to lot number 286 now, and £240 is bid at £240 then at 240, at 240, at £240 then at 240. Any advance at £240 then at 240. Are we all done? It's the maiden bid on Easy Live Auctions at £240, selling at 240. £240 is 589. Lot number 287, and I bid £240 on Easy Live Auctions at 240 then, at 240 then, at 240, at £240 then, at 240, at 240, at £240 then, at 240 then. Are we all done at 240 then? Selling at £240 then, all done at 240. 240 is buyer 589. Lot number 288, £220 is bid at 220. At 220 then, at £220. 260 now is bid, 260. At 260, £300 is bid now, 300. At 300, 320 now. At £320, at 320. At 320 then, at 320. Any advance at 320 then. I'm selling at £320, all done, and selling on Easy Live Auctions at 340 now. At 340, at 340, at 360, at 360. All done, at 360 then. I sell at £360. 360 is buyer 515. Lot number 289, £360 is bid on Easy Live Auctions at 360. At 360 then. At 360 then, at 360 pounds, at 360, any advance at 360? I'm selling at 360 pounds on Easy Live Auctions, are we all done? At 360, 360 is buyer 603. Lot number 290, the Rocking Horse Crown there, at 340 pounds is bid at 340 on the serum now, 340, at 340, at 340, looking for 360 please, at 340 then, at 360 now, Easy Live Auctions, at 380 now on the serum at 380, 400 pounds now on Easy Live Auctions, Easy Live Auctions is 400 pounds, at 400, at 400 pounds then, at 400, any advance at 400, at 400 pounds then, all done at 400, selling at 400 pounds, all done at 400, 400 pounds is buy at 671, lot number 291 now, and I bid 130 pounds then on Easy Live Auctions then for the Whitman coin albums there, 150's bid, 150 pounds then at 150, at 160's bid now, 160, at 160, at 160 pounds at 160, any advance at 160, all done at 160 pounds then, fair warning at 160, selling at 160, 170 now, just in time on the serum now, at 170 on the serum, you coming back, Easy Live, at 170 on the serum then. At 170 then, selling at 170 pounds, all done at 170. 170 is buyer SR 196243, and that's the first serum purchase of my stint. Lot number 292, and I bid 85 pounds on Easy Live Auctions at 85, and at 85, at 85, at 85 pounds, and at 85, any advance at 85, on Easy Live Auctions at 85 pounds, then made and bid online at 85, all done, and selling then at 85. 85 is buyer 528. Lot number 293, and I bid 42 pounds, 45, 55 bid, 55 then at 65, 75, 80 the bid now, 80 bid, 5, 90, 90, at 90 pounds, 5, at 90, at 500 pounds now, 110, at 110, at 110, at 110 pounds on Easy Live Auctions at 110, at 120, at 130, at 130, at 130, at 130, at 130 now, 130. At 130 pounds at 130, then at 130 at 130, at 130, selling on Easy Live Auctions at 130. 130 is buy at 721. Lot number 294, the hammered coins there, 360 pounds, 400 bid, 400 pounds the Easy Live, 440 now, 480 bid, 480 now, at 480, at 500 pounds then, at 500, at 500 pounds, at 500 then, at 500 pounds then, at 500, at 550 now, at 550, at 550 then, at 550 pounds then, at 550, at 550 pounds. At 550 pounds then, are we all done at 550 pounds? Selling then at Easy Live, on Easy Live Auctions then, at 550, 600 just in time at 600 then. At 600, any advance at 600 now? At 600 pounds then, are we all done at 600? I sell at 600 pounds, all done at 600. 600 pounds is buy at 721. Lot number 295 now, the alphabet coins there, the 10p's there, 40 pounds is bid, 5 bid, 45 pounds at 45, at 45 for the 10p's there, at 48 bid, 48 pounds is bid on Easy Live, 50 the bid now on the serum now, 50 the bid, 55 now, serum bidding at 55 then, at 60 the bid, 60 pounds is bid, at 60, any advance at 60 pounds then, at 65 is bid now, 65, all on the serum now, at 70 pounds is bid, at 70, worth that bid extra, surely at 70 pounds, at 70, any advance at 70, I'm selling on the serum then, last chance and selling on the serum then, at 70 pounds, 75, just in time, at 75 then, at 75, have you got 80, serum, at 75 pounds then, I'm selling then, at 75, all done, at 75, 75 pounds is buy at 689. Lot number 296, Kew Gardens 50 pence there, and I bid 80 pounds there, 80 pounds is bid, at 80 pounds then, at 85 bid, at 85 then, at 90 bid, 95 now, 95, 95, 110 now, at 110, at 120, at 120 now, 130, at 130, at 130 now, at 130, at 130, still 130. Sorry, sorry, 130 pounds now on Easy Live Auctions at 130 then, at 130, at 130, at 130 pounds then, at 130, at 130, at 130 pounds then, at 130, at 130 then. Any advance then? I'm selling at £130, all done at 130. 130. Sorry, that was after the hammer, I'm afraid.
I'm gonna, I need to go back to the 130, revert to this point, and sold.
684 is the buyer.
Yeah, cool. Yes, a little bit.
I'm afraid that was after the hammer for the previous bidder there. Lot number 294, the 50p salmons there. Found in someone's change from a very good local buyer of ours, and £70 is bid at £70 then at 70. Looking for 5 then please, at £70, at 70. Any advance then at £70, it's £80 now at £80. It's too late, Kelly. Rolling on at £80 on the serum at £80, at £80 on the serum at £80 then at 80. Sarah bidding now at 80. Easy Live, are you coming back? 85. Thank you, Kimberly. 85 now at 85, at 85 then at 85, at £85. It's against you, madam, at 85. Would you like 90?
Yes.
Thank you. £90. £90 is bid in the room. At £90 in the room. At 95 against you now. Would you like 100? £100 in the room. At £100 now. In the room at 100. At 100 then. 110 against you, madam. Are you sure? Thank you. At £110 then, I'm selling on Easy Live Auctions at 110. 110 is buyer 689. Okay, lot number 298, hello, lot 298 now, and £55 is bid, at 55, 65 is bid, £65 at 65, at 65, 70 is bid now, at £70 on Easy Live Auctions at 70, looking for 5 now please, at £70 at 70, at £70 then, at £70 then, at 70, any advance then, selling then at £70, all done at 70 on Easy Live Auctions, I sell, £70 is buyer 680. Lot 299, the collection of coins there, Canadian ones included, £110 is bid at 110, at 120 now, 120 is bid at 120 now. Any further interest then at 120, at 120 then, at 120, at £120 then, all done at 120 then. I sell at £120 then. Fair warning at 120, all done and selling at 120. 120 is buyer 722, lot 300 now, and you've got £220 then bid at 220 then, at 220, at £220 then at 220, on Easy Live Auctions at £220 then at 220, any advance then at 2, thank you, at 240 in the room now, 240's in the room, I've got a bid at 240 in the room, at £240 in the room then, thank you madam, at 240, you scare them off at 240, 240 is buyer 153. Lot number 301, the silver French coins there and various others, and I've got 110 online, I've got 120 with me, 120 with me, 130 with me, 130 with me, at 130, at £130 then, at 130 then, at 130, at 130, any advance then at 130, at 130 then, at 130, you'll be all done at £130 then, I'm selling then 140, 150 with me, £150, it's my bid at 150, at 150 then, my commission bid is still 150, at £150 then, I'm selling on commission at 150, 150 is buyer 1604. Lot number 302, the American coins there, £120 is bid at 120 then, at 120 then, at 120 then, at 140 now, 140, at 150, 160 bid, 160, £160 at 170, 180 bid, 180, at 180, at 180, 180 at 180, 190 now, 190, £190 at 190, any advance at 190 then, I'm selling at 190, all the bidding is on Easy Live Auctions at 190 then, at 190, we're all done, wrapping up and selling at 190, 190 is buyer 588. We're moving on now to lot 303, and I bid £340 at 340 now, at 360 now with me, my bid is 360, 380, 400 bid, my bid is £400 then, at 400, at £400 then, at 400, at 400, any advance then, 420, 440, commission bid at £440 then, at 460, commission is out, at £460 then, online at 460. At 460, any advance then at £460 then, I'm selling at £460, Easy Live Auctions has this one at 460, £460 is buyer 686. Lot number 304, Coin set there, £60 is bid, at £60 then at 60. Any advance then at 60. At £60 then, online on Easy Live Auctions at £60 then. Are we all done and selling at £60? Fair warning at 60. £60 is by at 528. Lot number 305 now, and £110 is bid for the year sets there at 110. At 110 then, at £110 at 110 for all the year sets there at £110 at 110. At 110, any advance there at 110 at 120 on the Sarah now. On 120 on Sarah at 120, Sarah at Sarah bidding at 120. Easy Live, are you coming back at 120 then? On the Sarah at 130 now, against the Sarah at 130 on Easy Live then. At 140 now on the Sarah at 140, Sarah bidding at 140. It's exciting, isn't it? At 140, at 140, at £140 at 140. Are we all done and wrapping up then? I'm selling to the Sarah at 140. 140 is buyer 781739. Lot number 306 now. The coin sets again, and I bid 100 on Easy Live then. At £100 on Easy Live Auctions at 100 then. At 100. At £100 then. At 100. At 100. At 100. Any advance then? We sell. It's the maiden bid on Easy Live Auctions at £100. £100 then is by 642. Lot number 307, the modern coin sets there from 2000 onwards, and I bid £120 then at 120 then on Easy Live Auctions at 120. At 120. At 120. Any advance then at 120. At 120 then selling at 120. All done at 120. 120, Easy Live Auctions is by 534. Lot number 308, various silver coins there. £110 is bid at 110 then. At 110, 120 is bid now. 120, 130 is bid now. At 130, at £130 then at 130. At 130 then. At 130. At 130 then. Any advance then at 130. At 130. At £130 then. All done and selling at 130. 130 is by 699. Lot number 309, £120 is bid at 120 then. At 120, at £120 then, at 140 is bid now. At 150 now, at £150 then is bid 150. On Easy Live Auctions at 150 then, and selling then at 150. 150 is by 582. Lot number 310, and I bid 120 then, at 120. At 120 then. At 120, any advance at 120, at 120 then, at £120 then, 130 then, at 130 then, at 130, all done at £130 then, and selling then at 130 on Easy Live Auctions at 130. 130 is by 667. Lot number 311 now, and I bid £150 then at 150. At £150 then at 150, at 150, at 160 now, at 160, at 170 now, at 180 then, £180 then, at 180, at 180, at 190, at 190 then, at 190, £200 is bid now, at 200 then, at 200, at 200 then, at 200, at 200, any advance then at 200, I'm selling then on Easy Live Auctions at £200, all done at 200. £200 is by 699. Lot number 312, £50 is bid online on Easy Live Auctions at 50. Looking for 5 now, please. At £50 then at 50. Any advance then at 50. At £50 then at 50. At £50 at 50. Any advance at 50. 5 bid now. 55 then is bid. At 55 then. At £55 then. All done and selling at 55. £55 is bid. 528 is buy. We move along then. Another clean sheet there. Lot 312, 313, sorry, is bid £50 there at 50. Looking for 5 now, please. At £50 there at 50. Any advance at £50 there at 50. At £50 there at 50. At £50, 5 down is bid. At 55 then is bid at 55. At 55 then at 55. Any advance at 55. Are we all done at 55 then? Fair warning and selling at £55. 55 is by 528. Lot number 314. The Treasures of Life there, £75. The Royal Mint there. 75 is bid. 75 looking for 80 now, please. At 75 then. At 75, any advance then? At 75. I'm selling then at 75. All done. And selling at £75. £75 is sold to buyer 534. Lot number 315, £50 is bid then at £50. At 55 now is bid at 55. At 55 then is bid at 55. At 55 then at 55. All done at 55 then. Fair warning and selling online at 55. £55 is by 528. We're moving on now to lot 316, the Royal Mint there. Treasures of Life, the premium proof 17 coin edition there. £95 is bid at 95 on Easy Life Auctions. 95 then at 95. Any advance then at £95. At 95, 100 is bid now. £100 at 100. At 100 then. Any advance then at 100 then. At 100. We all done at £100 then. I sell at 100. £100 then is sold to buy £6.99. Lot 317 then is £60 starting, 65 now on serum now, 65 and 70 on the serum now, 70 on the serum, £70 on the serum at 70. At £70 then at 70. Any advance then at £70. I sell then at £70. We all done? And selling then at £70 then on the serum then at 70. £70, that's the serum, and that's 361731. We move on now swiftly to lot 318, the Royal Mint Treasures Alive. 2013 edition this time. £85 is bid at 85 then at 85. Any advance at 85? At 85 then. At 85. At 85. Any advance at 85? 90 on the serum now. £90 serum bidding at 90 on the serum I've got. Looking for 5 please, Easy Life. At £90 then on the serum. I sell at 90. All done at 90. £90 is by 361731. Lot number 319, and I bid £600 then. At 600 on Easy Live Auctions at 600. At £600 then at 600. Any advance at £600 then. 650 now on the Sarah, on Easy Live at £650 then. At 650. Any advance then. At £650 then. All done at £650 we sell. 650 is buyer 667. Lot number 320 then, various coins then. You've got 130, I've got 135, sorry, at 135 with me on commission at 135, at 140 now, the commission is out, 140 then on the serum at 140, £140 then, on Easy Live Auctions at 140 then, at 140, at £140 then, Easy Live has this one at 140, 140 is buyer 699. Moving on to lot 321, the quarter ounce Britannia there, in a building society case as well, and I bid £700, at 700 then, at 700, at £700 then, at 700, any advance at 700 then, on Easy Live Auctions at 700, at 700, are we all done at 700 then? Selling then at £700, all done at 700. £700 is by 560. Lot number 322. And £700 is bid at 700 then, at 700, at 700, any advance then at 700, I'm selling that at £700 on Easy Live Auctions at 700, £700 then is buy at 505. We move along now to lot 323 now, the gold £1 coin there, and I bid £700 on Easy Live Auctions at 700, at 700, at £700, any advance then at 700, we're all done then, and selling at 700, £700 is buyer 505. Lot number 324, £300 is bid now at 300 then, at 300 then, on Easy Live Auctions at 300 then, at 300, any advance then at £300, Easy Live Auctions will have this at 300, £300 is buyer 660. Time for a little drink. Lovely. Moving on to 325 now. £1,400 is bid on Easy Live Auctions at 1,400 then. At £1,400 at 1,400. Any advance then at 1,400 then on Easy Live Auctions at £1,400. All done and selling at 1,400. £1,400 is buyer 560. Lot number 326 and £650 is bid at 650 then, at 650, at 650. Any advance at 650 then, at 650. All done then at £650 then. I sell at 650. 650 is buyer 560. Lot 327, the Brexit half ounce commemorative coin there. And £1,400 is bid. At 1,400 then. At 1,400. At £1,400 then. At 1,400. At 1,400. Any advance then and selling at 1,400. 1,400 is buyer 560. Lot number 328. The 24 karat gold proof coin there, £5, and I bid 2,006. I've got 2,700 here. At 2,700. At 2,700. I'm looking for 2,800, please. At £2,700. At 2,700. Are we all done then? And selling then at 2,700. All done at 2,700. 2,700 is buyer 5929. Moving on to lot 329, the platinum proof £1 coin, and 240 is bid, and I've got 250 here, at 250 here, at 250, at 260 here with me, at 260, 270 now with me, 270, I've got 270, at 270, at 270, at 270, I've got 270 with me, at 280, 280, thank you, also I'm at 280, at 280 then, at £280, at 280, at £280 then, at 280 then, all done at 280 then, I'm selling at 280, 280 is buyer 1328358. Okay, moving on now to lot number 330 then, a Brexit coin again there, and I'm bid £1,400 at 1,400 then, on Easy Live Auctions at 1,400, at 1,400 then, at 1,400, any advance then, at £1,400 then, at 1,400, all done, and selling then at 1,400, 1,400 is buyer 578. Lot number 331, the Raw Mint Silver Collection there, case, and £120 is bid at 120 then, at 120 then, at £120 then, at 120, any advance then. I'm selling then online at 130 now, 130, at 130 then, at 130, selling online at 130, 130 is buyer 528. Lot number 322, £420 is bid at 420 now, at 420 on Easy Live Auctions at 420. At 420 then, at 420 then, at 420. Any advance I sell at 430 I'll take, thank you, at 430 in the room, at 430. At 430 in the room, at 430 then in the room, at 430 then. All done and selling worth that extra bid at 430. 153 is the buyer for £430. Thank you. Lot number 333, and I'm bid £360 then at 360, at 360, at £360 then at 360, at 360, at £360 then at 360. Any advance then? 360, £400, at 400 now. I'm bid 400, at 400, at 400. 410 is bid in the room at 410, at 410, in the room at 410, at 420 now. Against you, madam. 430 then, at 430 in the room at 430. At 430 now, at £430 in the room at 430 then, 440 now, bid 450, at 450 then, at 450, at £450 then, at 450, at 450, all done then, selling then in the room at 450, 153 is the buyer for £450, thank you. Lot number 334 then, £100, £100, at 100, at 100, at £100, at 100, at 110, at 110, at 110, at 110, at £110 then, at 110, at 110, at 110, at 110 then, at 110, at 110, are we all done at 110? Selling at 110, 110 is buyer 680. Lot number 335 now, £170 then is bid at 170 then. At 170 on Easy Live Auctions at 170, 180 on Easy Live now. At 180 Easy Live Auctions at 180. Looking for 190 please, Sarah. At 180 then. At 180. Selling at £180 then. All done at 180. 180 is buyer 588. Lot number 336 then, and I bid £200 at 200 then, at 200 then, at 200 then, 220 now, 220 on the Serum at 220, Serum bidding at 220, at 220 then, at 220 on the Serum at 220. 230 is bid, 230 I'll take, at 230, at 230, at 230, at 240 against you, at 240 against you now, 250, £250 then, at 250, at 250, 260 now, 260, at 260 then, at 260 then, selling on the serum at 260, 260, 361731. We move along now to 337 then, and I'm bid £10 then is bid on Easy Live at £10 then. Easy Live at 12 is bid now, at 12, at 15 then, at £15, at 15 then. All on Easy Live then at 15 then, at 15 at 18, at 20 is bid now, at £20 on Easy Live Auctions then at £20, at 20, at 22 then, at 25 bid, at 25 then, at 25 then, 28 on the serum now, £28 on the serum, serum bidding at 28 then, at 30 now, at 30, at £30 then, on Easy Live Auctions at 30, any advance then at £30 then, selling on Easy Live Auctions at 30, £30 is buyer 722, lot number 338, and £360 is bid at 360 on Easy Live Auctions at 360, at 360, at 380, Sarah bidding now, 380, Sarah bidding, at 380, at 380, at 380, at 380, £400 now is bid at 400 on Easy Live Auctions at 400, at 400 then, at £400 then, at 400. At £400 then, at 400, at 400, thank you Annie, at £400 then. I'm selling at £400 then, Easy Live Auctions has this at 400, £400 is buyer 628, lot number 339, £190 is bid then at 190, at 190 on Easy Live Auctions at 190, at 190 then at 190, at 200 on the serum now, 200 serum bidding at 220 now on Easy Live, at 220, 240 on the serum, 240 on the serum at 240. At 240, any advance then at £240 then, at 240, selling on the serum then at 240, 260's bid now, 260 on the serum at £260, any advance at 260, we're all done and wrapping up at 260 we sell, 260 is buyer 1328, 358. Lot 340, the gold proof coins there, £420 is bid then at 420 on Easy Live Auctions at 420, at 420, at £420 then at 420, at 420, at 420 then, at £420 then, at 420, at £420 then, at 420, all done and selling at 420. Easy Live has that one at 420, 505. Lot number 341 now. The collection of coins there, £65 is bid, at 65 on Easy Live Auctions at 65 then, at 65 then, any advance at 65, 70 now on the serum at 70, at 75 now, 75 on Easy Live, 85 bid, 85 now on Easy Live Auctions at 90 now, at 90 on the serum, 90 on the serum, 100 on the serum now, £100 on the serum, all on the serum at the moment, 110 on Easy Live, 120 on Easy Live, at 120, Easy Live then, at 120 on Easy Live Auctions at 120 then, all done at 120 on Easy Live Auctions we sell at 120. 120 is buyer 628. We move along now swiftly to lot number 342. £130 is bid at 130 then, at 130, at £130 then, at 140 bid, at 140 then, at £140 then, at 140, any advance at 140, at £140 then, at 140, at 140 then, all done and selling at £140 then, fair warning at 140, 140 is buyer 628, lot number 343, 650 is bid now, £650 is bid at 750 is bid now, 750, at 750, at 750 then, at £750 then, at 750, we all done at £750 then, selling at 750, £800 is bid now at 800 then, at 800 then, at 800 then, at 800, any advance at 800, I sell at £800, all done at 800, £800 is 578, Easy Live Auctions there. Lot number 344, and £90 is bid at 90 on Easy Live Auctions at £90 there, at 90, at £90 there, at 95 now on the serum now, 95 or 100 now on Easy Live, at 110 on the serum, 120 then on Easy Live then, at 120 on Easy Live, at 120 on Easy Live Auctions at 120, 130 now on Easy Live, 130 Easy Live, at 140 on the serum, at 140 on the serum, at 140, at £140 then, at 140, 150 now, 150, at 150, 160 serum now, at 160 on the serum, at 160 on the serum, at 160, at 160, any advance then, I sell at £160, all done at 160, on 60 is buyer 361731. Lot number 345 now, and your bid £700 then at 700 then. At 700 on Easy Live Auctions at 700 then. Any advance at 700 then. I'm selling then on Easy Live Auctions at 700. £700 is buy at 578. Lot number 346, and I bid £90 then, starting at 90. At 90, any advance at £90 then? At 90 on Easy Live Auctions at 90. Are we all done at 95 then? At 95, at 95 then, at 95, at 95. All done at £95 then. Selling then at 95. 95 is buy at 534. Lot number 347 now, I bid £400 then on Easy Live Auctions at 400 then. At 400, 440 bid now, 440, 480 bid, 550 now, at 550, at £550 then, at 550, at £550 then, at 550. All done and selling at 550. Are we all done? Selling at 550. 550 is buy at 581. Lot number 348 now, and I bid 65. I've got 70 here on commission. It's £70 with me on commission at 70. 75 now on Easy Live Auctions at 75 then. At 75 then. Any advance then at 75 on Easy Live Auctions at £75. All done and selling at 75. £75 is buy 686. Lot 349 now, the coinage there, and £180 is bid at 180. At £180 then on Easy Live Auctions at 180. At 180, 180 on Easy Live Auctions at 190 on the Serum now, 200 now, back on Easy Live at 220 on the Serum, at 220, 240 now, £240 on Easy Live Auctions at 240. Serum, you coming back at 260, they're back at 260, at £260 then, at 260, at 260, at £260, last chance, last call, we sell at 260. 260 is a Sarah in there, 361731. Lot 350 is silver proof coinage there, £130 is bid, 130 then, at 130 then, at 130 then, at 130. Any advance then at 130. I sell at £130 then on Easy Live Auctions at 130. 130 is buy at 723. We move along swiftly now to lot 351, and I bid £340 at 340 then, at 340, at £340 then, at 340 then, at £340 then, at 340 then, at 340 then, selling at 340. 340, Easy Live there, 578 the buyer. Lot number 352 then, £170 is bid, at 170, 190 bid, at 190 on Easy Live Auctions at 190, 200 bid now, at 200, at 200 bid, at 200, at £200 then, at 220 bid now, 220, at 220, 240, £240 then, at £240 then, at 240 then, all done, at £240 then, all done at 240. 240 is 628. Lot number 353 now, and £500 a bid at 500 then, at 550 now, at 550 on Easy Live Auctions at 550 then, at 550, at £550 at 550, all on Easy Live then, at £550 then, selling at £550. 550 is buy at 613. Lot number 354 then, and I bid £1,500 then, at 1,500 then, at 1,500 then, at 1,500 then, at 1,500 then. Any advance at £1,500 then, all done and selling at £1,500. £1,500 is buy at 578. Lot number 355 then, the error coin there, and £32 we're up to on the Sarah, 38 bid. 38, 40 then, £40 is bid, 42 then, at 42, at 42, on the Serum at 42, at 42, 45 on Easy Life then, at 45, at 48 then, at 48, at 48 then, at 48 on the Serum then, at 48, Serum bidding at 48, at 48, for the £1 coin there at 48, 50 in the room, £50 in the room at £50, against the internet, 55, 55, at 55, 60 in the room now, £60 in the room at 65, against you madam, £65 there on the Sarah then at £65, at 65, are we all done? At 65 then, I'm selling on the Sarah at 65, 65 is buyer 1 1327,026. Lot number 356 then, and I bid £130 at 130 then. At 150, at 150, at £150 there, at 150, at 170, at 170, at 170 on Easy Live Auctions at 170, at 180, at 180, at 180, at 190, 190, at 190, £190 now on Easy Live Auctions at £200 is bid now. At 200 then, at 220 then, at 220, at 220, at 220. At 240 then, at 240 then, at 260, at 260, at 260 then, at 260, at £260 then, at 260, at 260 then. All done. I'm selling at 260 on Easy Live Auctions at 260. 260 is buyer 671. Lot number 357, and we're up to £200. Bid at 200 then, at 200 then. On Easy Live Auctions at £200, at 200, at 200, 220 now. Sarah at 240 then, at 240 then, at 240 on Easy Live. 260, 280 is bid now. 320 now, 320, at 320 then, at 320, at 320, 340 on the Sarah now. 340 then, 360 on Easy Live. At 360 on Easy Live then, at 360 on Easy Live Auctions, thank you, at £360 then, all done. At £360 we sell. 360 is buyer 523. We're moving on rapidly to lot 358. 220's bid at 220 then, at £220 then, at 220, at 220 then, at £220 then, at 220. Any advance at 220? At 220 then, selling at 220 then, fair warning at £220, 240's bid at 240, just in time at 240, at 240 on Easy Live Auctions at 240, 240 is buy at 667. Lot number 359, £800 is bid now at 800 then on Easy Live Auctions then, at £800 then, at 800 then, at £800 then, any advance at 800, I can sell at 850 now, at 850 then, at 850 I can sell at 850. Any advance at 850 then? All done at £850 then. All done at £850 then. All done at 850. 850. 562. Lot number 360 now, and I bid £130 then at 130, at 130, at 140's bid, at 140 then, at 150, at 160 then, at 160 on Easy Live, it's all on Easy Live at 160, at 160, at £160 then, at 170, 180's bid, now on Sarah at 180, at 180, 190, 200 on Sarah at 200 then, at 220, 240 bid, 240 then, at 240, at 240, 280's bid, at 280, at 280 on Sarah at 280, at 280 then, at £280 then, at 280, £300 is bid then, at 300 then, at 320 then, at 320, at 320, at 320 then, at £320 then, at 320, at 320 then, on the Sarah now, at 320, last chance, at £320 I sell, at 320, 320 is buyer 1509569. Lot number 361, miscellaneous coins, £300 is bid, 300 then, at 300 then on Easy Live Auctions at 300 then, at £300 320 then, at 320 then on Sarah now, 320 on Sarah at 320, Sarah bid now at 320, at 320 then, at 320, any advance there, selling on the Sarah at £320. 320 is buyer 361731. Lot number 362, miscellaneous coins there. Starting at £150, 120's bid, at 120 then, at 120 then, at 120, at 120, at £120. A maiden bid then, at 120 then. Fair warning, I sell at 120. 120 is buyer 550. What 362 now, and I bid £420 then at 420, at 420 on Easy Live Auctions at 420, at 420 then, at 420, any advance at 420 then, selling at £420, all done at 420, 420 is buyer 550. Lot number 364, and I bid £180 at 190 with me now. 200 bid at 200 then, at 200 then, at £200 at 200 then, on Easy Live Auctions at 200, at 200, any advance at 200 then, at 220 now, at 220, on the Serum at 220, Serum bidding at 220, at 220, at 220 then, at £220 then, at 220, 240 now, on Easy Live Auctions at 240, at 240, at £240 then, at 240, any advance then, at £240, I sell at 240, £240 is buy at 724. Lot number 365, the collector's cabinet there, the coin there. Start me at £70 then, please. £70 then, please. £50 then for it, please. 50's bid in the room at £50, in the room at £50 then. At £50, any at 55 now against you. 60 in the room, £60 in the room at 60, 65. 70 in the room now, £70 in the room at 75. 80 in the room now, £80 in the room, 85. 90 in the room, £90 in the room at 90, 95. Would you like £100 is bid in the room at 100, in the room at 100 now, at 100, at £100, 110 now, 110, at 110, at 120 in the room now, 120, at 120 in the room at 120. Any advance then at £120 in the room at 120, I sell at 120, 130, just in time at 130. Would you like, you've waited a long time for this one, at 140, back in the room at 140. At 140, at 140 then, I sell in the room at 140. 140 is buyer number 249. Thank you very much. Lot 366, various coins there, and you bid 90. I've got 100 here, 110 with me at 110. My bid is 110. Looking for 120, please, at £110. Me at 110. At 120, commission is out at 120 then on Easy, on Sarah then at 120 then, at 120, selling at £120. Sarah bidding now at 120. We sell at 120. 120 is buyer, oh, very quick, 361731. Lot number 367. The Jubilee Silver Medal there, and I bid £190 then on Easy Live Auctions, at 200 now on Easy Live Auctions, at 200 then, at 200 then, at 200, any interest, any further interest, sorry, at £200 on Easy Live Auctions, we sell, £200 is 660, lot 368, 2232 is bid at 32 on the Serum at £32, 35 on Easy Live now, 35 Easy Live bidding at 35, any advance then at 35, at 35 then, at 35, 38 bid, at 38, at £40 then, at £40, at £40, at 42, at 42, at 42 on the Serum then at 42, at 42 then. At 42 then, are we all done? At £42 then, fair warning at 42. 42 is 1775490. Lot number 369, the bronze middle there, and £60 is bid on Serum at £60 then on Serum now. At £60 is bid on Serum at 70 bid now, at 75, 75 then, at 75 then, at 75 then, at 75 at 80 bid, 80 bid, at £80 then, at 85 then, at 85, at 85 then, at 85, at 85, at 85. At £85,000, all done, and selling at 85, 90 then, at 90, at £90 then, at 90, at £90 then, at 90, at £90 then, at £90. Are we all done, and selling at £90? £90 is 670. Lot number 370 then, the slavery coin there, and stop at £80 then, please. £40 then, please. There to be sold. £40. Any interest at 40? £40 I bid on Easy Live Auctions at £40. And Easy Live at £40. Looking for 2 then, please. At 42 then. At 42 on the Serum then. At 42, 45 against you. At 45 on Easy Live Auctions. At 45, 48 then. 48 on the Serum then. At 48 on the Serum. At 48 down on the Serum. At 48. At 48, 50 Easy Live then. At £50 on Easy Live Auctions at 50. Any advance at 50 then. I sell at 50 to Easy Live Auctions at £50. £50 is buyer 671. Lot number 371. £85 is bid at 85 then. At 85 then on Easy Live Auctions at 95. 110 at 130 now. 130 at 130 at 130 at 130 at £130 then on Easy Live Auctions at £130, all done at 130. 130 is buyer 651, lot number 372 then, £110 is bid at 110, at 110, at £110 then on Easy Live Auctions at 110, at 110, at 110, at 110. Are we all done at 110? At 110. Fair warning then, I sell at 110. 110 is buyer 642. Final lot of today is lot 373, the 1848 Chinese junk keyring. And we're off and running at £150 then, at 150 on the serum, at 150, 170 serum, at 170 then, on the serum at 170, 180, 190, 190, all on serum, 200 now, Easy Live Auctions at 200, 220 bid, 220 at 220 then, on the serum at 220, are you coming back to 240 on Easy Live Auctions at 240, at 240, at £240 then, on Easy Live Auctions at 240, the serum is out, nothing from the room, I sell at £240. £240 is buyer 671, and that's a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. We shall see you all on the 4th of March. Thank you very much.